say here.
Winds are only going to get stronger from here on out.
If a hurricane comes here and takes this town out, it's going to be a financial disaster.
All right, guys, you are listening and seeing the first bands of Irma work their way through the Keys, and believe it or not, this was about 3.5, 4 hours ago, okay? So the storm is still kind of sitting there flirting with Cuba. It will do that potentially for another 6 hours or so and then make that turn. Once it does, there is certainly a chance it could strengthen back toward a Category 5. I wish we could say that that's not the case, but we can't. We have to tell you that there is a chance for further strengthening. This structure of this storm is so well intact. Even with it flirting with Cuba, it really hasn't taken it down all that much. 150 to 130 may seem like a lot, but we still have a Cat 4 here. We're still looking down the barrel at the strongest hurricane since Donna in 1960 to come across the Keys. All right, so what do we have here in downtown Miami? You can see that the wind out of the northeast is blowing the palms back away. Pretty much a steady wind here. Occasionally when we do get some rain squalls and some thunderstorms, those winds do kick up a little bit more, maybe gusting toward 40. Winds a lot stronger at the beaches. Remember, I'm in downtown. So you've got the river, you got the bay, and then you have the beaches, which are taking the big wave action and some of the stronger winds because there's no friction. The other thing here is I'm right across from the Port of Miami. Yesterday we had a huge Royal Caribbean cruise ship out here, and a Carnival one as well off to the left near the bridge. But both of them are gone, but I know the Royal Caribbean, I think it was Enchantment, took their employees out. And so they just went right out of the way. They just got out even east of the Bahamas. They're going to sit there and ride this thing out, and then they'll come back into port and let everybody get back home. But a great idea, certainly, just to A, get the ship out of harm's way, and B, get their employees out as well, give them a chance to evacuate on their home turf, if you will, on the place that they actually go toward work. All right, let's talk about what's going on with Irma. We are at 9:55, so we're an hour or so, if you will, from the next advisory. Carl Parker, senior meteorologist at the Weather Channel. Let's talk about what you're seeing, Carl, in terms of the satellite, maybe the radar out of Cuba. Is there anything that you see weakening, strengthening at this point?
Well, certainly we've been seeing a lot of degradation in the cloud there in the western half of the storm. So you're seeing that interaction with land. The eye is not as well defined. Could be right along the coast there for another 6 hours. It could be as long as 12 hours, maybe even longer, depending on some of the model guidance there. And then it's going to begin to make that turn. Now, the longer it spends close to the coast, you've got more chance of the intensity coming down. But as you mentioned, this thing has got a lot of what is called inertial stability. It's been going and going for a very, very long time. It's not easily going to be slowed down. If it does continue to weaken at all, it's going to be a very gradual and very subtle thing for the most part. It's certainly not going to really lose a lot of intensity anytime soon. And the big change that we saw here in the last day or so was this shift even farther to the west in the model guidance, taking it right up and along the west coast of Florida. Now, because it is such a large storm, we're talking about the core of the storm affecting the west coast of Florida. So the very worst of the impacts there along the west coast. But by no means does that mean that we're not going to see impact along the east coast. In fact, hurricane force wind gusts entirely likely across much of South Florida and the eastern part of Florida. And as the storm comes back out over the open water, it's got this long stretch here. You've got 90 miles of distance between Cuba and Key West, right in there. So you've got that, and then you've got probably another 90 miles if it stayed right down the center line, or even more if it's farther west. And it is possible that the storm might move even farther to the west. The best guess right now is that it's going to come into the coast, but because of all this time out over the open water and exceptionally warm water with temperatures in the upper 80s and lower 90s, that's why we think it's entirely possible that the storm gets back up to strong Category Category 4, possibly Category 5, and this is why the impact is going to be devastating along the coast there. And obviously, if it's farther to the west, that's going to even raise the stakes for in terms of storm surge there in a lot of low-lying terrain along the west coast of Florida. And then beyond that, the storm comes up into northern Florida, hurricane force winds getting all the way up here into South Georgia, and hurricane force wind gusts will make it as far north as northern Georgia. So this is going to bring a significant impact to Atlanta as well. And that's going to be starting late Monday and into early Tuesday. Winds now gusting to 39 in Marathon. We've had wind gusts into the middle 60s in the Middle Keys already. So that tropical storm force wind is now coming into the Keys, and extreme South Florida will be moving in this evening into areas, say, around Palm Beach County and over into Naples. So you've got to be in your shelter by that time. It's going to be too late to do anything. And also, public officials are going to be recalled at that point. So you're not going to have the same level of access to police and firefighters. And then here you go into Sunday morning, and you see that strong wind, that tropical storm force wind getting up into the vicinity of Bradenton and Sarasota, as well as Lakeland and Titusville there, and then continuing farther north into the evening. Now, here's a look at the model forecast. And so tomorrow morning, that most dangerous part of the storm, that eye wall, devastating the Keys. One of the strongest hits that we've seen in a very long time, could well be since Donna in 1960. Our coverage continues right now.
A storm surge of 5 to 10 feet could wipe out our low-lying areas.
Well, very concerned.
The Weather Channel started talking about this storm far enough out. They heeded our warning.
And we have our continuing coverage of Hurricane Irma. I'm meteorologist Jen Carfagno. I am now live in Savannah, Georgia, where we are under a mandatory evacuation that began this morning, and contraflow began this morning, as well as residents and visitors now are streaming out of Chatham County. So let's talk about this powerful Hurricane Irma, which is a Category 4 right now as it brushes the northern coast of Cuba, moving over the Florida Straits. We are going to watch these next 12 hours very closely, because we're anticipating re-strengthening of Irma as it continues to turn over the very warm Florida Straits. I want to talk about the situation here. If we can show you what's happening in Florida. I know we are following down around the Florida Keys, and I don't know if we have that tower cam available, but they've been getting some of the outer bands already in the Florida Keys, in South Florida, off and on squalls through the day today, and this is really just the beginning. Here's a live look, as you can see, and you know what you see in the sky there is actually only going to get worse in the coming next 12 hours as we continue to see off and on squalls in those outer bands of very large Hurricane Irma. You know, continuing to watch the outer band sort of lash South Florida, and we were concerned that that would start happening today as folks try to make any final preparations and final evacuations, even as new evacuation orders get issued as that track of Irma now continues up right along the west coast of Florida. All right, so here's the radar, and you can see again where Key West is and where the center of Irma is, and look how far reaching those outer bands are. You know, all the way over towards Miami and Homestead, we're getting some showers as well right now, and certainly even in the northern Bahamas, you're getting tropical storm force conditions with the outer reaches of this large hurricane, which the hurricane itself has tropical storm force conditions that extend out nearly 200 miles in terms of, you know, from center to the outer bands. So we're expecting this to be a far-reaching impact here, even well before we get a landfall at some time tomorrow. Let's talk more about what's happening here across portions of Florida. You know, continuing to see folks evacuate in the Florida Keys, the National Weather Service still putting out messages that it's not too late. If you need to get to a safe shelter, go now before conditions go downhill. In Miami, we've got folks who are ready for Irma. The shelters are certainly very active in the Miami area. We're taking a look at some spots that have been boarded reported up even up into Charleston, where I was yesterday. You know, in Charleston, South Carolina, we're not in the cone. Savannah, we're not specifically in the cone, but we'll still feel impacts as winds. You're looking at the forecast for winds here by Monday. With those extreme outer reaches of tropical storm force conditions, winds could get in excess of 50 or 60 miles per hour. And tidal concerns will be a big impact as well, with going through 5 high tide cycles in Charleston and in Savannah and along the coast of southern South Carolina and Georgia. 5 high tide cycles that will cause flooding as well, starting actually by this evening. All right, so watching the radar here, as you can see, the far-reaching extents. Another concern we have, of course, is that with any landfalling tropical system, there will be the threat for tornadoes. So that will be a risk starting today, ramping up even more tomorrow, and ramping up throughout the Florida Peninsula. And the tornado risk actually is there as well into Georgia and South Carolina by the time we get into Monday. All right, so let's take a closer view. There is a tornado warning for Collier County. This includes Golden Gate and parts of Naples. This goes until 10:15 local time. We're watching this little cell, and this is just the beginning of the threats that we will see from Irma. This is a very real concern, as we have torcons of 8 from Florida stretching all the way up to 4s through 6s in Georgia and South Carolina. Again, the threat will continue to ramp up as we get through the next 24 hours. As we watch this radar, watch the rotation of the storms and the general movement of the storms. It's not your classic moving from west to east. Look how it's moving from east to west. So be on guard as well as we watch the track of these individual cells on some of the extreme outer bands here of Irma. Okay, continuing to talk about some of the preparations that folks are making. You know, we're watching the radar right now. It is today, but overall a dry day in southeast Georgia. And I want to talk about the contraflow across South Florida, where contraflow operations have begun on I-16. And they are urging folks who need more information about the evacuation in South Georgia to check in with gema.ga.gov. There was a tweet from the Georgia EMA earlier today, and they have stated that contraflow operations have begun on I-16. So looking at that forecast for this area, today expecting a dry day, and we will expect the brunt of the weather in Savannah on Monday. All right, let's go down to the Tampa area, Hillsborough County, and see what officials are saying right now.
Weather Service, right now, we're seeing that the storm surge threat for us really indicates that we really need to look at level A. Now, for those that don't know, if they're not clear or clearly understand exactly where level A is, that's why we wanted to have the maps for you. And we'll make these available for you. But everyone up against the coastal area here in Hillsborough County, as you're looking on the map, the areas in red here, not the yellow, not the green, not any of the areas. The yellows and red are what we're talking about right now. That's mandatory for you to get out. Obviously, if you're in category level B, evacuation zone, and as Mike said, you want to make sure that you're doing everything that you can to be safe, and you need to consider the safety of your family. So do what you need to do to make sure that your family's safe. As we're talking about this evacuation, I want everybody to be clear. We have 16 shelters open, as Mike mentioned. Those shelters are available. Folks are going to those shelters, are taking advantage of it, but not everybody has to go to a shelter. If you don't need to go to a shelter, just get to a safe location. We're not asking you to go hundreds of miles. We're asking you to go tens of miles. As you look at the map, Hillsborough County, the areas that are outside of our evacuation zone are areas where we have shelters set up, and those are areas that are safe. If you have family, if you have friends, if you have those that you can go to and get a hotel room or what have you outside of the surge zone, that's what you need to do. Just make sure that the facility is strong enough to withstand the winds that we're expecting from this storm. So mobile home parks, manufactured homes, that's what we're saying. They can't withstand the wind. They need to evacuate now as well anywhere in the county. So we just wanted to be clear. Another point, we're hearing the question, as Mike mentioned, flood zones. This is the surge zones that we have are from the water driven by the wind from a hurricane that can push on shore. When we're talking about flood zones, we're talking about inland flooding, and those that live in the areas near our rivers, the Little Manatee, the Alafaya. You know that we get a lot of rain and those areas flood. You know that these are known areas for us. We're expecting right now possibly up to 10 to 12 inches of rain with this storm. Again, it's unknown, but you need to plan for that. With that type of spike, you need to be getting to high ground if you live in those areas that are known to flood. Again, we're talking surge zones for the hurricane surge, but also we're talking flood zones. If you know you're in a known flood zone, be prepared to go to higher ground. We want everyone to continue to listen to the messages coming out, because this storm is still changing, folks. It's not here yet, and it still could make changes. It could do a lot of different things. We want everybody to be as safe as possible and just continue to stay focused. Mike?
From the fire rescue standpoint, we'll be calling in additional personnel to staff our stations. We're going to stand up technical search and rescue teams throughout the county. These are highly skilled firefighters, fire medics who have additional training. They will go out as soon as the storm passes. So what we'll be doing is calling in additional personnel. We'll be prepared before the storm arrives. There will be a period of time while the storm is over us that we will be unable to respond because of the high wind speeds. You should be aware of that, and the dispatch 911 center will report that to you if you call in. As soon as the storm passes and the wind speeds are safe for us to be out on the roads, we will immediately go out into the communities. These 8 or more technical search teams will be dispersed throughout the county. They will be going out with bulldozers and push crews. There will be TICO line crew with them. There will be additional support so that they can take care of any challenges that we may face, whether it be cutting power lines, removing trees, and getting access to the communities that are the most damaged. We additionally will have, because of the riverine flooding as well as the flooding that will occur due to the storm surge, we are going to have additional aquatic assets, boats, John's rigid hull inflatables, inflatable boats dispersed throughout the county with trained rescuers on those as well to handle any of the water issues that might occur. We are definitely, we've been planning for several days specific to this storm. Lived here all my life. This is the worst storm that the state will face. You need to be prepared for it. You need to plan, have a plan for your family. Heed the advice of emergency management and government. Do what we're asking you to do. Go to a shelter, safe shelter, and know that we are prepared once that storm has passed. We are prepared to go out in the community and do everything we can to help those that need the help. Thank you.
Good morning. Senator Darrell Roussan, Senate District 19, portions of Hillsborough and Pinellas counties. The time to be brave is now for our first responders, for our law enforcement, for our firefighters, for the great staff of Hillsborough County. I want to congratulate County Administrator Mike Merrill for what he's done and his entire staff, and the Hillsborough County Commissioner and their chairman for working diligently. The time to be brave is not for our citizens to hunker down, but follow the directions, the instructions of the law enforcement professionals, of the emergency professionals. When they tell you to evacuate, evacuate. Mandatory means mandatory, and particularly to the portions of my district, Apollo Beach and Riverview and Brandon that are in A, please, if you haven't left, please go. Safety is about family. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Catherine Egan with Harvard.
And you're just listening to a Hillsborough County press conference there. There are new evacuations now ordered for part of that area. I want to remind folks to go to floridadisaster.org, and there are links there specifically where you can go in and put your address in and know what zone you're in then, and know if you are indeed part of that evacuation. I think that's key. And I want to echo something the last speaker said, which is the time to be brave is now. And he was speaking both to first responders and also to citizens. And when it comes to citizens, when it means to be brave in this case, it means to follow the orders of emergency management. If you're under an evacuation order, you need to go. Mandatory means mandatory, and that is key for all the areas in impact zones from Hurricane Irma. This is a powerful hurricane. It is large, and we know that the destruction will not just happen around that core of the eye, that it will actually happen well removed as we see long-running hurricane force winds, tropical storm force winds that extend out, more than 100 or even close to 200 miles away from the center. And then, of course, tornadoes will be another threat as well. Look at the hurricane warnings. This is not just a coastal event. In entire central and south Florida under a hurricane warning. The hurricane watch extends north of that. And again, it's not just coastal areas. This is an inland threat too. And you can see where the tropical storm watches now have been expanded a bit up into parts of South Georgia. And as we get through the day today, anticipating more of Georgia and perhaps even parts of the South Carolina coast, getting into some of those watch as well. All right, one area that is in this warning is in the Orlando area. So Justin Michaels is standing by there with how folks are preparing. Justin.
Hey, Jen, I'll tell you what, preparations are well underway here in this part of Florida. We can tell you that the Florida Department of Transportation, they've removed all cones and barrels and anything that could be a projectile on the highways, completely taken off, and those highways are clear. It was actually kind of strange going through construction zones and not even seeing a construction barrel today while we traveled from West Palm Beach to here. So what's the timing of this here in Orlando? Well, things start to go downhill tomorrow afternoon, Sunday afternoon, and they're going to see possible winds 35 to 40 mile an hour, tropical storm force winds late afternoon, gusts up to 60. And then as far as the worst, it's overnight Sunday into Monday, where hurricane force winds 90 to 100 miles an hour, sustained winds of about 70 miles an hour, and the probability of localized flooding here in Orlando. Because of all that, I can tell you lots of closures are coming up today. Walt Disney World closes at 9 tonight. Universal Orlando closes at 7. SeaWorld Orlando and also Busch Gardens Tampa close at 5 o'clock tonight, and the Orlando International Airport, it is stopping flights at 5 o'clock tonight. Of course, we do know all public schools, public universities, all of those are closed right now, and a lot of preparations are going into way. We can tell you here in this public park, we've spoken with some public works people. They've removed everything from this park that could be a projectile, and that's what we're finding all over the state of Florida, making sure places are prepared and ready so that nothing can actually hurt somebody. Of course, the Weather Channel will continue live coverage of Hurricane Irma as it's now impacting Florida right after this. Welcome back to the Weather Channel's continuous live coverage of Hurricane Irma now impacting Florida. I'm Justin Michaels, live for you. We're well underway here in this part of the state. One thing they're doing is really helping to manage where homeless people will go. Let's talk to Lori Harris. Lori, you're with the city of Orlando, and it's your job to help get homeless people where they need to go to be safe. How are you doing that?
Hi, Justin. So yes, thank you. Because at the city of Orlando, we believe that no matter what your zip code is or the lack of a zip code, that everybody has access to resources, especially during a disaster. And so when we say Orlando United, we also mean our most vulnerable population, which are those who are unsheltered. So today we're working in partnership with Orlando Police Department, Orlando Fire Department, EMS, and our Hope Outreach Team, which is our daily folks who interact with the homeless on a daily basis. And so through that, we are reaching every corner, also the frequently spotted areas of the homeless, to make sure that they know where they can go. And so starting at 4 p.m. today, we have worked it out with links to provide transportation just for our unsheltered population to go to 4 specific shelters at the city of Orlando. So again, this is just an extension of who the city of Orlando has always been. Orlando United means Orlando for everybody. And so we really think it's important for even our most unsheltered citizens to get shelter as soon as possible.
All right, Lori Harris, thank you so much for your time. We know you're doing good work out here, and you stay safe as well, okay?
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you so much. And let's head right now to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. That's where we find Sarah Rosario with an update on conditions there.
Justin, the wind is really starting to pick up here in Fort Lauderdale as Hurricane Irma is expected to make landfall in just less than 24 hours. If you take a look, I'm here on the beach and you can see the waves just crashing to the shore here. The wind significantly picking up. Several people are out here, although officials have told people to get out of this area. Many people just want to get a look at what it looks like out here on the beach. These people are choosing to stay. We've seen all types of things out here. People kite sailing, people surfing, many people again just trying to. This is what we see during storms. People come out to the beach, they get a good look, and so this is what they're doing today. In the meantime, many people, though, in Fort Lauderdale are heeding the warnings. This is a mandatory evacuation zone. Many people who are deciding to stay have their walls shuttered, they had their sandbags out, everything that you would typically do to prepare for a hurricane. But the problem is supply is running short and people have a limited time to get out of this area before Irma hits this place. A big concern for people on the southwest side of Florida, as you know, but here in Fort Lauderdale, 500,000 people told to evacuate. Shelters are filling up. Police officers will be getting off the roads when winds hit 40 miles per hour. So we're going to keep an eye on the storm here in Fort Lauderdale. Back to you, Justin.
All right, Sarah Rosario, thank you so much for your time. And of course, whether you're in Fort Lauderdale or you're in Orlando or you're over in Tampa or the southwest part of the state, everybody in Florida will be impacted by Hurricane Irma. Of course, the Weather Channel will have live continuous coverage after this.
All right, Justin, thank you so much. And here are the key takeaways for Hurricane Irma. Severe hurricane conditions beginning over southern Florida beginning Saturday night. That is tonight. And life-threatening storm surge likely across southern Florida may expand northward. Significant impacts from wind, surge, and rain becoming more likely across Georgia and the Carolinas. So we've been watching a slight downward trend in the intensity of this storm because of the interaction with Cuba. Our hearts going out to folks in Cuba. Winds gusting as high as 159 miles per hour along the northern coast here within the last couple of hours. Now moving west at 12 miles per hour. So we expect to see that continued interaction with land. You can see how there's been a little bit of degradation on the west side of the circulation, but it's going to come back out over the open water, and for that reason could very well be once again a strong Category 4 or Category 5 storm. Live look at Fort Lauderdale, and our coverage of this powerful storm continues in a moment.
please understand the following. Bring your bedding, bring clothes, bring food.
Hey, what's up? My name is Allie. I'm a creative strategist here at YouTube. We wanted to make an episode about community contributions. So I spoke
quiet toys for the
using this tool for quite a while.
And we're going to make some type of accommodation
transcribe or translate your videos. This could mean captions, subtitles, or even your title and description. But why should you do this? What's even the point of having translations or captions or subtitles? Well, I asked Tom Scott about this, and he suddenly got quite serious.
Closed captioning for videos
evacuations and evacuees going to shelters in Collier County. And last year when we were talking about Matthew, I remember one public official said, when it comes to shelters, it's a lifeboat. It's not the love boat.
It's funny, Tom's examples really made me laugh because I've literally done all of them. I really need to start stashing headphones wherever I go.
There are evacuations ongoing in Georgia. I am in Savannah, so I want to talk more about that here in Chatham County. Right now I'm going to bring in Joseph Marinelli from Visit Savannah. Talked to you last year with Hermine, now we're doing this
again. It also
again.
feels really good. Tom was so overwhelmed with the response when it happened to him that he made a whole video thanking his audience.
I'm having a bit of a moment because this week a team of people subtitled the latest citation needed, which is a massive job. I've always wanted to have full subtitles on all of my videos because it's...
What about contraflow? Because I know that's affecting I-16, but also affecting routes in and out of downtown Savannah, right?
Yeah, it is. I think they even went earlier with the contraflow than the expected 8 a.m. and it's helped with some of the traffic flow. So far, so good this morning.
Has it been a challenge to get visitors to leave? You know, they're here for vacation, right? They want to stay. And especially as they see the track shift, they may think it won't be as bad. There still is going to be a lot of weather challenges here.
Yeah, no question. I think watching Houston for 2 weeks and then the amount of time people have watched this have helped them prepare. You know, we did have one convention cancellation. A lot of people in town kind of riding out the storm. So we hope to get through it quickly.
And I just want to ask you about flooding, because the flooding that we are expecting out of this, the levels will be worse than Matthew last year. In fact, it could be close to 2 feet above that. So what areas do you think are going to be the most inundated with floodwaters?
Well, we pay particular attention to our beach destination, Tybee Island. That's right on the coast there. And then moving in our barrier islands, Whitmarsh Island, Wilmington Island, Skidaway Island, a lot of residential there. Once you get into the historic district of Savannah, it's about a 30-foot bluff. So we're less concerned about that. We keep an eye on River Street down here, but really keeping an eye on the island side of town, which is mostly Tybee Island.
Yeah, I noticed some businesses boarding up. Do you expect to see more of that today?
Yeah, we expect to see that throughout the day today and hunker down for Sunday evening and Monday.
Monday's going to be the brunt.
Monday's going to be the brunt, and then start adjusting. You know, really pay attention to any destruction and damage on Tuesday, and then paying attention to the evacuation drills.
All right. Well, Joseph Marinelli, thank you so much. Appreciate your time. You know, as we continue to watch what's happening with Hurricane Irma, and again, watching that track, everyone focuses on the track, but we know with a system this large, there will be impacts hundreds of miles away. And even today, you know, it's a bit breezy here in Florida, but even today at high tide, both this morning and then again this evening, high tide will start to see some flooding, and especially tomorrow, major flooding is forecast actually at the time of high tide in those areas that often are inundated because of extreme high tides. We'll see that. And then Monday, of course, will be the toughest day. All right, let's talk more about the track. And I want to bring in Carl Parker. You know, Carl, one thing I'm just observing since I'm here in Georgia and feeling the dry air, dew points are down, and I looked at the water vapor to see if there's any hope of this dry air getting in to Irma, and it just doesn't appear that way. It seems like that old front that's sort of laid out across Florida, the only thing it's doing right now is preventing any of this dry air from getting in.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. The atmosphere is fairly homogeneous right now in the vicinity of the storm. The one thing that is affecting it is the interaction with land. So we have seen a little bit of a downtick in the intensity of the storm down to 130 miles per hour. One of the questions is just how much farther is it going to go? Now look at the satellite presentation over the last 12 hours, and you can see how it really has changed radically in the western half of the storm in particular. You see how there's much less in the way of that high cloud right in there because of the interaction with land. And in fact, when we look at the satellite picture, it looks like it's getting very close to making landfall here in Cuba. So one question is just how much farther on land is it going to be? It could spend between 6 to 12 hours near land or on land, maybe even a little bit longer. Obviously, that's terrible news in Cuba. We've got a report of winds gusting to 159 miles per hour there in northern Cuba. Our hearts going out to those folks. But the longer it spends close to the coast there, that that's obviously going to have an impact on the intensity, and that could affect the intensity down the road, even though it is going to come back out over the open water and strengthen once again. So the forecast right now calling for the system to become a strong Category 4 to near Category 5 intensity as it is moving into the coast here. And as you look at this cone, do not think of this as an impacts cone. That's not what it is at all. This is a forecast for the center of the circulation, but it's an enormous circulation. Could well be a major hurricane coming right up and across Tampa and St. Pete. That would be into early Monday. And then beyond that, a substantial circulation through much of North Georgia and up into parts of Alabama as well, where we could be looking at widespread tree damage and power outages. And again, this is an absolutely huge circulation with tropical storm force winds extending 200 miles out from the center. And there you see the hurricane force winds in red as they come up and into southwest Florida. So that's where the very worst of the storm is going to be, and conditions going downhill overnight tonight and certainly into tomorrow morning. But hurricane force wind gusts now reaching into South Florida at that time. And the farther west you are in South Florida, say the closer to the Sawgrass, the greater the potential for wind as you'll be closer to the core of that storm. The wind's already coming up. We've had reports of winds gusting as high as 66 miles per hour in the Middle Keys, now 39 in Marathon. We're going to see just more and more of that through the course of the day today. Winds getting to tropical storm force by 8 p.m. this evening through much of South Florida as well as southwest Florida, and then by tomorrow morning up into Tampa and there around the Space Coast as well. So by that time, you've got to be ready. You've got to shelter in place at that time. Now, here is a high-resolution model forecast, and there may be some deviation. To give you an idea, first of all, the size of the circulation, and second of all, the impacts that we're going to see at various locations. And so talking about that direct impact there coming into the Keys overnight and into early tomorrow morning, but at the same time, that very large circulation piling up the water. So a 5 to 10 foot surge in South Florida and through the Keys as well. Winds really picking up in southwest Florida at that time. Core of the storm coming into southwest Florida during the afternoon and into the evening on Sunday. So Marco Island, Naples, Fort Myers, Port Charlotte, getting farther up the coast, talking about just tremendous impact winds, well over 100 miles per hour, but also winds gusting to hurricane force in South Florida at that time, and conditions really starting to go downhill in Tampa at that time. And you see the water also pressing up against the coast there, that onshore flow are reaching up towards the Space Coast. Then into Monday morning. At this time, we've got hurricane force wind gusts into the north central part of the state, Orlando and northward. We've got a huge onshore flow pushing the water into parts of Georgia, northern Florida, as well as into South Carolina, and then a flow on the back side of the system that is bringing the water up in Tampa, and we may see an increase in the storm surge values there in Tampa because the storm is going to take this track that's right along the coast. And then even beyond that, we look going into Tuesday very early in the morning or late Monday, and some of the modeling suggesting that the winds could be easily sustained around 50 miles per hour there into North Georgia and parts of South Carolina as well, and gusting up to 70 and 80 miles per hour. So widespread tree damage. You've still got this tremendous onshore flow that's pushing the waves and water against the coastline there. So again, an absolutely enormous storm, Jen, that's going to have a huge impact over a very large area, but the worst of the impacts coming into the Keys, southwest Florida, and up through Tampa, St. Pete, and into areas just to the west of Orlando. Jen, back out to you.
Carl, you talked about several of the aspects, the wind and also the rain as well from Irma. Let's talk about the storm surge. And, you know, in particular, with this track potentially either just along or just inland on the west coast and getting up towards the Tampa area, let's talk about the surge there. We know that's a very surge-prone city, and we know the first impacts, of course, will be further south in the Florida Keys starting this evening.
Yeah, exactly right. And it is a very surge-prone area because of the nature of the bathymetry, or the sea floor, where you're seeing this orange color right in here. You've got a very shallow continental shelf. And if you've ever been to Tampa and St. Peter, Southwest Florida, you know when you go to the beach there, you can walk out for a very, very long way. In an environment like that, unlike a situation where the seafloor drops off very quickly, that really piles up the water as you've got that onshore flow. And so this is an area of the country that is exceptionally surge prone. Now, with that in mind, this is the forecast from the Hurricane Center. There may be an increase in these values along the west coast of Florida because we expect that prolonged period of onshore flow after the storm comes through. 3 to 5 feet right now in Tampa, but you may see that value coming up. So you've really got to think about being away from the coast there in Tampa. This is really significant surge in South Florida and down through the Keys. 5 to 10 feet of surge there, getting right into those intercoastal waterways and those bays, and that's going to cause a lot of significant flooding. The very worst of the flooding perhaps there in southwest Florida, getting up towards Marco Island. Marco Island could be very hard hit by the storm. Naples as well, and up into Fort Myers. 8 to 12 feet of surge is really tremendous. And what do we mean by those values? Well, you take a look at what 1 to 3 feet of surge means. You're talking about enough water to float a car and to bring it away. And you can expect very large areas without power in that level of surge. Then you get up to 3 to 6 feet, and that's easily within what we're expecting across a lot of South Florida. And you're talking about life-threatening conditions. There's a tremendous amount of weight and force in this water. And so trees, building materials, debris can get into that water and act as battering rams. It could reach right up your front door. And then when you get to 6 to 9 feet, this is getting above the first floor of your home. So this is on what we're expecting on the high end in a lot of South Florida. Major damage and building destruction is possible, and that storm surge can extend miles inland. So this is why we say you run from the water and you hide from the wind. You can hide from the wind as long as that water is not going to get to you. But if you're in a place like, get out of there, because the surge is really going to be significant, up to 12 feet there in Naples. You're just not going to be able to survive that if you're right along the coast. And winds gusting to 100 miles per hour plus, maybe well above that, could be 130, 140 miles per hour. Up into Tampa, we're right now looking for a surge of up to 5 feet. We may see that number come up. The National Hurricane Center is looking at that possibility right now. Here too, winds gusting to 100 plus miles per hour, so significant wind damage right up 75 there. Bradenton, Sarasota, into Tampa, St. Pete, and farther to the north. And then on the east coast, because it is such a large circulation, even though the core of the storm is going to be in the western part of the state, we're still looking for as much as 10 feet of surge in Miami. Winds gusting to hurricane force, even a little bit higher than that as you get into the western exurbs of South Florida. And in Orlando, looking for winds gusting to 75 plus miles per hour coming in late Sunday and also into Monday. And speaking of Orlando, let's go now to Justin Michael, who is there. And Justin, we often think about hurricanes as being a coastal event, but this is certainly not going to be the case with this storm in this part of Florida.
That's exactly right, Carl. In fact, they're taking lots of precautions here in Orlando to make sure everything is basically bolted down. That includes in public parks. We're at Lake Eola Park here, a beautiful park in downtown Orlando. You can see just a wonderful place to come spend time. And you can see the garbage cans all secured to the ground, all of them all the way around. There are recycling bins down that way. And in fact, here at this half shell, all these seats are secured down where they typically are, but still they have gone through painstaking efforts to make sure there is nothing that can turn itself into a projectile. The municipal crews here in Orlando. We've also seen that on the highways. Driving this morning from West Palm Beach to here, we went through several construction zones on 95 and also the Florida Turnpike. There are no barrels in a construction zone. There are no cones in a construction zone. Imagine that for a second. You're driving along and it just kind of feels naked. Well, that's because they took all those out because they could turn into a projectile, especially if people are needing to use those highways, first responders to use those highways to get people to safety. Well, They got those out of there just as a safety precaution. Taking a look right now at some other preparations around Orlando, you can see a restaurant. We went around town this morning gathering some video of the last-minute preps. The storm here is supposed to really impact starting tomorrow late afternoon and really into tomorrow night. That's when we're talking hurricane force winds here in Orlando, and also very, very probably flooding rains. So lots of boards going up, lots of preparations at homes and businesses and apartments happening right now. Of course, about a day out from when they're expected to have a problem here, Irma welcoming itself right here into Orlando. And we spoke to somebody who works at one of those restaurants about the preparations there. Listen.
As a restaurateur, no power would mean we would literally lose thousands of dollars worth of product in our restaurants, because without power, there's no cold refrigeration. All the product has to get thrown out. So we may actually take us another day before our purveyors can actually get us food, before we can actually produce it and then, sell it to our guests.
So, it's not just damage to properties and the potential for that kind of damage, but also damage to things like food. Restaurants, of course, need that. It's their lifeblood. They need that food in there to serve to their people. So they're doing things to make sure they are as prepared as possible for what we're now knowing are going to be hurricane force winds here in Orlando. Because of that, and because of what's going to be happening in this part of the state, there are lots of closures here in this part of the state, including probably the biggest closure of them all. The Magic Kingdom, Walt Disney World, will be closing at 9 o'clock tonight. Universal Orlando closes at 7 o'clock tonight. Both SeaWorld Orlando and Busch Gardens Tampa will close at 5 o'clock tonight. Orlando International Airport stopping all flights at 5 o'clock tonight. And all of public schools and, of course, state colleges and universities are closed through Monday. There are many, many more closures and cancellations. You just make sure you're checking out the venues you may be going to. If you're somebody who has tickets to different things at Disney World, make sure you're checking out whether your event has been canceled. It likely has been. One thing about Disney World, though, we do know, despite the fact that the parks are all closing and the venues are all closing, all of the properties as far as hotels and resorts, they're staying open because, of course, those are the places people will go to keep themselves safe. And they're going to hunker down there when there could be potential for 100-mile-an-hour winds in this part, wind gusts in this part of the state. So again, lots of precautions. People seem to be ready. We're going to be talking to first responders and also just everyday people here in Lake Eola Park throughout the day. But again, the general sense we're getting right now, Jen, is that people here, Irma is coming. They've known it for quite some time. And they, at this point, a day out, are ready. Jen in Savannah right now.
Justin, thank you. Good update there. And I think there has been fantastic communication about the risks here, and people know what to do, what they're expected to do in terms of evacuations. And of course, this has been ongoing, now for 4 or 5 days right here. This has been a great planning process to get people out of harm's way. I want to give you some of the other latest stats on what we know right now. There are 15 million people under a hurricane warning presently, more than 3 million under a hurricane watch. I will tell you, we are awaiting the newest advisory that will be in with about 15 minutes from the National Hurricane Center, and we will show you how the watches or warnings have changed. The Tampa airport will cease commercial operations at 8 o'clock tonight, and Florida Governor Rick Scott is telling people living in South Florida to leave right now. Hillsborough County, Florida has issued now a mandatory evacuation order for those who are in evacuation zone A. And in Georgia, Governor Nathan Deal has extended his state of emergency to a total of 94 counties. The Georgia National Guard is preparing 5,000 troops to be on active duty. And as we watch here again from Savannah, a lot of folks have asked me about the airport here, the airport in Charleston. Even airports that aren't specifically getting affected today by conditions from Irma. Some restaurants will be closed, right? So there are certain things to anticipate, and your expectations need to be set appropriately, even outside of the extreme impact areas from Irma. We know conditions are going to go downhill starting today. We've already seen those outer bands come into South Florida. We also know that another threat, along with the core of the hurricane, will be the threat for tornadoes. And some of those outer bands, like we've seen this morning, we will see those tornado warnings. It's already a breezy day right here along the southeast coast. We had a front that came on through, and we're just going to experience these breezy conditions now, only ramping up as we get into the next 24 hours, expecting a very windy Sunday evening, and Monday across Georgia and into South Carolina, expecting the winds to be on the order of 40 to 60 miles per hour. And so damage like you saw with Matthew and all the trees down, right? You know, this is not a storm that is taking a track at all like Matthew, but in terms of damage expected, I think it's going to be very similar here, where we're expecting trees to come down, power outages to go out. The brunt of the weather in Savannah will be felt on Monday into Monday evening. The rainfall overall 5 to 8 inches, but there will be spots that get more than 8 to 10 or even more than 15 inches of rain locally. We are expecting some of those outer bands to kind of set up, but as it slows down just a little bit, we will get some heavy rainfall, which again be a concern right here across the area. So in terms of the timing for Georgia and for South Carolina, today is still a fine weather day, right? You can still continue your preparations. Evacuations are ongoing right here in Chatham County.
you will be responsible for maintaining the cleanliness as well as the care for that animal during the event.
Welcome back to the Weather Channel's continuing live coverage of Hurricane Irma as it now gets to Florida, slowly but surely. But take a look at some very startling video right now. This is breaking video coming in to the Weather Channel newsroom, and you can see this is coming from Cuba. Talk about some devastation there in Cuba, on the north coast of Cuba. We're talking about blowing winds. We're talking about whiteout conditions. Just take a look at what is coming at Florida right now. That's what you have to keep in your mind when you're looking at video like this. This is the kind of weather that South Florida and Western Florida are going to be experiencing. This is what people have already experienced. Trees down, people rushing to safety. A very dire and dangerous situation that people, in this part of the country have been working very hard to prepare for. But of course, there are some people who are taking it maybe a little too lightly. Well, maybe this will help them jump into action, because in some parts of the state, like where we are right now in Orlando, they have about before the really big part of this will start to bulk up. So that's what Cuba looked like. Let's talk to the Rear Admiral Peter Brown, Commander of Coast Guard Operations. Rear Admiral Brown, you are Coast Guard Operations Commander for Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and Puerto Rico. Thank you for joining us here on the Weather Channel.
Thank you, Justin, for the opportunity to talk with you and your viewers. And as you said, some people have already been hit by the storm. As you pointed out, in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, particularly the island of St. Thomas, there has been damage there. Coast Guard units and Coast Guard members are now in their third day of response and recovery operations there. And then here in Florida, we are preparing for the storm. Our Coast Guard units and people have essentially evacuated in conjunction with civil authority evacuation orders from the Florida Keys, from the southeast coast of Florida, and from the west coast of Florida. So we take our assets, our helicopters, our airplanes, and our ships, and we move them away from the storm's path, pre-positioned to be able to respond promptly to save lives as soon after the storm passes as we can.
So, Rear Admiral, your job is to come in as the Coast Guard, just like all of our military and first responders' job is to keep people safe, right? How are you working to keep your personnel safe? The people on the ground, on the front lines who are there to keep us safe, how do they keep themselves safe?
So our Coast Guard cutters, our patrol boats, and our medium endurance, our larger cutters, have left the ports of Miami, Key West, and St. Pete, and gathered in groups at sea far enough from the storm, generally to the south of Cuba, to stay safe there, and then to be positioned to respond as quickly as possible. Our aircraft, our helicopters, and our fixed-wing aircraft from Miami, Clearwater, and Jacksonville have positioned out of the state for the moment, but will come back in as soon as it's possible to do so afterwards to begin life-saving search and rescue operations. As you saw in Hurricane Harvey, where the Coast Guard rescued over 11,000 people, the Coast Guard will be prepared both in the air and on the water to respond promptly after the storm.
Rear Admiral Peter Brown, Commander of Coast Guard Operations for Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and Puerto Rico. Sir, we do appreciate your time and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And let's go to Carl Parker in the lab right now. Carl, that video coming out of Cuba is just devastating. We've seen video like that coming up through the islands of Irma and what this storm has done. To see it this close to our shores, even scarier right now than maybe it was before for a lot of people.
Yeah, very, very tough situation in Cuba. We've got reports of winds gusting to 159 miles per hour in Cuba. If there is any good news there, it is that they are generally quite well prepared. A lot of sturdy structures and good shelters, and they've had a lot of experience with these storms. But this is a devastating storm and an absolutely enormous storm. And we've got the new advisory from the National Hurricane Center, Category 3 storm now, winds of 125 miles per hour. So we continue to see a slow weakening as the storm has been interacting with land there in Cuba. And the way that we could term this is down but far from being out, because the storm has got every potential interacting with land there in Cuba. And the way that we could term this is down but far from being out, because the storm has got every potential to get very, very strong once again. It continues to be an exceptionally strong storm, but we're talking about not just a Category 3, but quite possibly a strong Category 4 or even a Category 5 storm before it makes landfall. And that's going to be coming up in the Keys later tonight, overnight tonight, and then certainly into southwest Florida into tomorrow. Now moving west at 9 miles per hour. The pressure is 941. Here is the forecast. This is a look at the model forecast. So the trend has definitely been along the west coast there. So we're talking about the core of the storm in that case. Here's the forecast track and intensities from the Hurricane Center following that. Now keep in mind, this is not an impacts cone. This is not showing you where the impacts are going to be. The impacts are going to be well away from the center in this case, because you're talking about not only strong wind over a very large area, but surge effects, winds and waves driving into the coast. That's already producing a water level rise in South Carolina and Georgia. And the forecast now looking at a possible Category 4 storm coming into the Keys. That's the best guess based on all of the available evidence. And then looking at a large, exceptionally powerful storm with the winds up in the Pete area, and beyond that moving up and into North Georgia. There could be widespread tree damage in these areas. The big thing about this storm is that it is an incredibly large circulation. We're talking storm that is absolutely enormous. We'll have more coverage coming up right now.
Storm surge of 5 to 10 feet could wipe out our low-lying areas.
Well, very concerned.
The Weather Channel started talking about this storm far enough out. They heeded our warning.
And our continuing coverage of Hurricane Irma. The new advisory is in. Irma is pounding the north coast of Cuba right now, and the forecast is for Irma to continue to re-strengthen as it heads through the Florida Straits and affect the Florida Keys. Now, I want to give you the latest on the advisory, though. It is now with winds of 125 miles per hour, and the pressure has come up to 941. And the hurricane hunters have been finding that as they've been flying their missions through and getting information. We know the land interaction with Cuba has allowed Irma to weaken slightly. However, it is still a formidable force right now, likely just causing destruction right here on that north coast of Cuba and those islands that go right along it. And then we're also expecting the re-strengthening as it moves up through the Florida Straits. Now, I want to also mention something about the movement. So the movement is still to the west at 9 miles per hour. And the key here is that it's slowed down a little bit, 9 miles per hour, and it has not made that northerly turn just yet. We are anticipating that through the day today as it starts to turn more to the west-northwest and eventually to the northwest and then to the north. But that movement has not happened just yet. A couple of new important updates as well coming in with this new advisory, and that a storm surge warning has now been expanded on the west coast all the way up to the Suwannee River. That includes Tampa Bay. So Tampa Bay is now under a storm surge warning. The watch has been expanded as well, and that on the East Coast, I want to mention now the storm surge watch goes all the way to the Isle of Palms in South Carolina. So now we've got the coast of Georgia and we've got part of the coast of South Carolina under a storm surge watch. In terms of the hurricane warnings and hurricanes watches, the warning has been expanded for the Gulf of Mexico coast too, to the Osceola River. All right, let's go now to Pinellas County, which includes the city of St. Pete, and listen into what officials are saying. Okay. All right, so we'll get to that if we can. But again, I just want to continue reading off some of these changes that are coming in, and we'll get them graphically for you as soon as we can. Literally just moments ago, we got the new advisory in for Hurricane Irma, and we have seen the storm surge warnings extended. The storm surge warning now does include the Tampa Bay, and also the storm surge watch has been expanded on the east side, and now that includes coastal areas of Georgia and South Carolina. All right, so let's look at the projected path and see in terms of changes that have happened here. As we look at the short term, Look at where Irma is going to travel. It is going to travel right over the Florida Straits. We're expecting a re-strengthening with a landfall at some point during the day on Sunday, likely later in the day, as we watch the West Coast implicated. Let's go now to Pinellas County and get an update from officials there.
The worst of the storm surge will occur on the back end of the storm, and that's estimated to occur between 2 p.m. and 10 p.m. on Monday. Given these forecast conditions, we declared the mandatory Level B evacuation for Pinellas County effective at 8 a.m. this morning. In addition to the 7 shelters that were opened yesterday to support the current Level A evacuation, we have opened 9 additional shelters today for a total of 16 emergency shelters available. This is a dangerous, impactful storm. It requires your serious attention and your immediate action. Pinellas County, our cities, and our other governmental partners have prepared and taken action. Now it's your turn. If you are in a Level A or B evacuation zone or reside in a mobile home anywhere within Pinellas County, you must evacuate. The time for procrastination is over. You must act now. And with that, I'll turn the briefing over to Sheriff Galtieri.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Mark. From a law enforcement perspective, we have maintained the checkpoints into the barrier islands and have restricted access, as we talked about previously. So far, it's going well. I would tell you that probably about 40% of the people who approach the checkpoints have been turned away because they shouldn't be out there and are not residents or business owners or people with a need to be there. I anticipate that we'll make a decision at some point as the day progresses today to further restrict access. And we will get to a point, and I can't tell you just yet when that point will be, but we will get to a point, and it will be sooner rather than later, that we are not going to allow any.
All right, hearing about the preparations from officials in Pinellas County right there. We've got breaking news, a brand new advisory from the National Hurricane Center. The storm is now a Category 3 hurricane with winds of 125 miles per hour. That very close interaction with Cuba there. The storm is basically half on land, half off of land. That has served to weaken the system somewhat, but it's still a very large circulation, and it's got every opportunity to re-strengthen as it comes back out into the open water, into the Florida Straits, and coming up towards the Keys here. That's going to be coming up later today and overnight tonight, moving into the Keys overnight and early tomorrow morning. So here's the updated forecast track and intensities from the National Hurricane Center. Very important for you not to think of this as an impacts cone, because we are going to feel impacts that are well outside of that area all the way up into the coast here. You've got storm surge and very strong winds as well. This cone is showing you where the center of the storm is likely to go, and it's probably going to move right up and along the west coast of Florida and could very well be a Category 4. And keep in mind that with intensity forecasts, there's some wiggle there, as they can be in error in the longer term in particular. So we could be talking about a storm that's even stronger than that, especially if it's on the western edge of that envelope there, that forecast error, as you could be talking about a storm that is out over the open water for a longer period of time. So this is going to be devastating in southwest Florida and the Keys, as well as the west coast of Florida up into the Tampa area. Major hurricane likely coming right into Tampa and also into the central part of the state and into Orlando. And then beyond that, the storm comes up and across South Georgia and into North Georgia, and is still going to be a formidable storm at that time, though it will be weakening. Again, you're talking about a very large circulation, and winds could easily gust to 80, perhaps 90 miles per hour in North Georgia. So widespread tree damage is likely in the Atlanta metro area as the storm moves in. There's a look at the advisories. Now, keep in mind, this is not telling you about the level of impact. This is rather telling you about timing, and where the hurricane warning is in effect. That's where hurricane force winds are expected inside of 36 hours. And in fact, it's going to be a lot sooner than that there into South Florida. Hurricane watch is where hurricane force winds are possible in 48 hours. You see that extends a little farther west, now reaching over into the Panhandle and also up into South Georgia. And this is a look at the timing of those tropical storm force winds. So this is when you've got to be ready to shelter. Those strong winds are coming in right now. We've already gotten winds gusting over 60 miles per hour in Homestead as well as into the Middle Keys. Those strong tropical storm force winds coming up into Palm Beach County as well as into Naples. We think by this evening, by early evening. So again, you've got to be at your safe place by that time. And then the tropical storm force winds getting up towards St. Pete and Tampa, Bradenton, Sarasota, the Space Coast as well, just south of Orlando by tomorrow morning, and then up into northern Florida by tomorrow evening. And again, we're talking about a very, very large circulation. Not the largest that we've ever seen, certainly, but it's way up there. Tropical storm force winds extending out 200 miles from the center, and the hurricane force winds extending out 70 miles from the center. And so as we bring this extremely large area up into southern parts of Florida, you're looking at hurricane force wind gusts making it into South Florida as the core of the storm is coming up into southwest Florida and into the Keys there. So that's where the greatest damage from wind and surge is likely, right in there. But you're going to see a tremendous onshore flow coming up into South Florida, and that's why we're looking at a water level rise of wind gusts. Looking at the trends here in the satellite picture over the last several hours, you can see there was more of a westward component early on. Now we're seeing a little more of a northwest component, perhaps, even though the official motion is west. And so it is still interacting with land. But as it moves away from Cuba and more towards the northwest and north, it's going to be coming over exceptionally warm water there. Water temperatures in the lower 90s in some areas and in the upper 80s. So there's more than enough fuel to bring the storm back up to a solid Category 4. And again, there is some room for error there, so even possibly a Category 5 as it is coming into the southwest coast of Florida. See winds now gusting to 40 miles per hour in Key West, gusting to 38 in Marathon. So our tropical storm force conditions underway now in the Keys and getting up into southern parts of the Miami-Dade area. And let's get over to Justin Michaels. He is in Orlando. And Justin, this is going to be a really significant storm there in Orlando, as well as we could easily be talking about a prolonged period of hurricane force wind gusts.
Yeah, and Carl, that's a big concern because of what does Orlando mean? Well, happiest place on earth, the Magic Kingdom's right up the street, right? We've got Disney World here, we've got Universal Orlando here, we've got other theme parks here, which means there are tourists here. And someone watching this very closely is Chief John Mina, Chief of the Orlando Police Department. Chief, thanks for being with us.
Good to be with you, Justin.
So tell me, as you have been preparing and getting your residents and the citizens here and your visitors here ready for this hurricane, what has been your message?
Our message is to listen to the media reports, take this storm very seriously, and shelter in place. Make sure you have all the necessary needs. A gallon of water per day per person. Make sure you have your food and water for enough days, because there will be some power outages for us here in Central Florida.
Well, we do know hurricane force winds expected to kick in tomorrow night, Sunday night into Monday. It's going to be quite a night here in Orlando as far as rain and winds. As far as your police force and their safety and maybe people needing to be rescued, what are you asking of your citizens when it comes to what's happening during the storm?
Well, within the next few hours, we will probably let people know about a curfew that will happen sometime tomorrow evening. We're asking people to stay indoors, don't put themselves in danger, because there may be points in the storm where we cannot respond to those people. So asking people to stay indoors, shelter in place, and not be tempted to go outside. It's going to be very dangerous out there.
And Chief, one more question for you. As you go around the city of Orlando and probably even the outskirts of Orlando, different communities, different cities around Orlando, do you feel the area is ready? You as law enforcement?
I do. You can tell people are taking this very seriously. People are boarding up. They're getting all the food and supplies they need to shelter in place. So I feel very good about our community. Our government is ready. Police and fire, emergency management. We've all been working for days and days preparing for this. We're ready, hoping for the best, preparing for the worst.
Awesome. Very good. Chief, thank you so much.
Right,
John Mina, we appreciate your time. You stay safe. Thank you for your service. Yeah, thank you. So again, you heard the chief say here, Jen, we're going to be talking about a curfew that will likely go into place tomorrow afternoon and, of course, through Hurricane Irma, going through here all Sunday night into Monday morning. And again, hurricane force winds. The good news, Jen, he feels this city and all the surrounding cities here in Central Florida are ready. Jen, up to you in Savannah.
Well, that is key, and preparation is key. It's happening all the way here in South Georgia as well. We do have a mandatory evacuation that begun this morning, is ongoing, and actually will continue through tomorrow morning as well. I want to bring back in the latest advisory, though, to talk about a couple of things here. So I want to focus in on first the winds. The winds from Irma have come down to 125. Now, certainly with the impact to land, we anticipated that, and it is now a Category 3. But one thing to note from this latest advisory is that everything's been pushed north, because now it's about a timing thing. And so now the hurricane warnings, the hurricane watches have all been pushed north, and you can see the tropical storm watch as well. The hurricane watch extends all the way up into South Georgia, Albany, Georgia, under a hurricane watch, actually in a tropical storm watch, but just south of there under that hurricane watch. So anticipating inland impacts. And in fact, the latest forecast, keeps it as a very strong hurricane, even as it makes the landfall and continues inland. And we will see those hurricane force winds impact inland areas. This is not just a coastal event. Look at that. At Monday morning, we still have it as a 115-mile-per-hour hurricane, which will be having far-reaching effects as those outer bands lash South Georgia and even into South Carolina. Power outages are going to be significant power outages all the way from Florida right up into Georgia, maybe even parts of Alabama, and certainly into South Carolina. Irma has been lashing the northern coast with its eye wall actually for the last several hours here, but we know from this video from the eastern part of Cuba, look at those trees bending in the wind. We can see visually there are some structures that have been damaged as well, and folks trying to seek shelter as the storm lashed Cuba. And now as Irma continues to actually just put its full force on that northern coast of Cuba and the islands right there. Today, we're expecting that move up over the Florida Straits, and we're already feeling the impacts here into the southern U.S., including the Florida Keys and South Florida, getting some of those outer bands. And in fact, in Fort Lauderdale, some of those outer bands have already made their way in. As you can see, if you look at the radar right here. Let's go down to Fort Lauderdale, and NBC's Sarah Rosario is there with more. Sarah, good day to you. Tell me what the town is like right now.
Well, Jen, here in Fort Lauderdale, so far we've had on and off wind and rain, actually a lot of wind, but a little bit of rain. We haven't had steady downpours yet, but we're told that that is on the way. We're expecting that to come. Out here on the beach, we're seeing these waves crash along the shore as families come out here just trying to get a last look before things really start to deteriorate. A little ray of sunshine even right now. We've seen all types of people out here, surfers, kite surfers, everyone just trying to take advantage of some of these great waves out here, even though city officials are warning people. This storm is massive, it's powerful, it's extremely dangerous. You need to get out of this area as the storm comes in. We just got some new information from a press conference a couple minutes ago where we learned that governor is telling everybody, the whole state of Florida, that everyone needs to be prepared to evacuate. He's telling people that if you live in South Florida, you need to get out of this area by noon today. Here in Broward County, where I am, we're told that a curfew will go into effect at 4 p.m. And as the winds start to increase, local officials tell people they will not be able to call 911. Emergency responders will not be available to help. Police officers are blocking several streets right now. I'm told there's an officer on every causeway. All the bridges are closed, gas stations closed, airports closed. These officers will get off the streets once the winds here reach 45 miles per hour. So we're tracking the storm here in Fort Lauderdale, seeing how it's impacting this area. We'll keep you updated throughout the day. Live in Fort Lauderdale, Jen, back to you.
All right, Sarah, thank you for that. You can see again, it's breezy everywhere throughout Florida already in advance of the system, and the winds are really going to pick up as those bands move in through the evening today, and certainly by tomorrow, things going downhill. Let's talk about Savannah. I'm in Chatham County. Savannah's in Chatham County. There is a mandatory evacuation here, and actually for all areas in South Georgia to the east of I-95 and a couple of spots to the west of 95 as well. So to help facilitate that, the Georgia EMA is doing a contraflow on I-16, and we've been following that. They started this morning by reversing the lanes, and so far, so good, as what we've heard and what I can follow out there in terms of how that is going. Now, you can see in terms of the alerts that we've got the expansion of the Hurricane Watch and Tropical Storm Watch now into parts of inland South Georgia. There's a view of the contraflow. Again, traffic is moving along just fine and in very orderly fashion right there on Interstate 16. So the weather has certainly helped the situation as well. Weather today has been dry, anticipated to stay dry. It's a little breezy, but other than that, no other weather concerns here across South Georgia. You know, in Charleston, where I was yesterday, they are not under an evacuation. There are some areas near the Beaufort area that are, and certainly heed the local warnings on that. But in Charleston, they decided not to do a mandatory evacuation. But there are still watches now expanded through the area. So Savannah now, from this map appearing under Hurricane Watch, tropical storm watches have expanded up into South Carolina, and conditions will go downhill through the overnight tomorrow night into Monday, with the brunt of the system here where I am in Southeast Georgia being felt on Monday. We'll have continuing coverage on powerful Hurricane Irma after this.
Pet owners should bring all appropriate vaccination records and the appropriate kennel for the size of the dog, or the kennel or the crate. Again, bring all your supplies. You're responsible for picking up the pet waste. There must be a family care member or a caretaker for the pet present always.
And that was from Collier County, where shelters are filling up as people heed the evacuation orders and get to a safe shelter. Conditions going downhill starting later today with those outer bands. In fact, already this morning, we've been feeling the impacts of Irma in South Florida. Now, here in the Savannah area, it's been a breezy day, not because of Irma necessarily, but we've had a front that's come on through and some dry air has worked in for now. That's going to change significantly because in Savannah, we are now under a hurricane watch and a storm surge watch as of the new advisory that just came in from 11 o'clock from the National Hurricane Center. So let's talk about the impacts here. Under a mandatory evacuation, I want to bring in the mayor of Savannah, Eddie DeLoach, to talk more about, Mr. Mayor, come on in here, talk more about what we're expecting. So first of all, city preparations. I know we're under evacuation, but what is the city doing to help facilitate that?
Well, we got the Chatham Area Management Group. They're actually working hard now, having people leave the area. We're loading up about 7 buses at a time. We got about 1,000 people we got to get out of town that don't have a drive or can't or don't have a ride or something like that. So, and those that are in wheelchairs and that type thing. So we've got that going on right now to take care of them and move them out. And we also are setting up buses for those that aren't handicapped that need a ride out also. So it's running right now over at the Civic Center, and everybody's on hand. It's all running smooth. So we sort of got prepared last year when we had Matthew come through, and everybody thought that might be ours for the for the next 30 years in this way, but we'll deal with it and move forward with it, and we got a great group of people taking care of people.
Well, 48 hours ago, Savannah was pretty much in direct line for this. Now, the impacts are going to be different, but still significant, actually. So do you think now that we're under hurricane watch and a storm surge watch, that will help people take it more seriously?
They need to take it seriously because that surge itself is 3 foot higher than what we had with Matthew right now. So if they realize what happened at Tybee and that surge that they had, people should know that they need to get out of the low-lying places and the areas on the other side of the Truman Parkway, which is a big deal to us. They need to move up to higher ground and move out of town if they can do that. I know we've got a mandatory, evacuation, so I hope everybody takes it seriously and everybody moves out of town as quick as possible.
The wind actually will likely be worse than what you experienced from Matthew.
Yes.
And so what preparations is the city making to make sure everything's secured and can withstand winds of in excess of 60 or 70 miles per hour?
Well, we have had the fire department and the police department's been going around and making sure that things are set up and taken care of. And SEMA's been working really hard to make sure we've got it all, everything in line. So I'd say we're batting down as far as we can do, as us batting down, we're batting down ready to go. Because we thought it was going to be a really, a Category 3, so now here we go, we back up, but it's still, you got to be concerned about the weather because it took us all year just to get cleaned up from Matthew. So with that you add that to what we got coming here, and it's worse than Matthew, then we need to plan on something
Preparation
serious.
Is key, Mr. Mayor.
Yes,
all right, thank you so much. Appreciate your time here today.
Have a great day.
And Carl, I have been comparing to Matthew because here in South Georgia and also in South Carolina, we know that the wind will likely be worse in terms of strength, despite the track being completely different than it was with Matthew. And then also when it comes to the tides here, the water is going to be higher than it was with Matthew. So if you flooded with Matthew, their plus will be impacted by the flooding that we're expecting from Irma. All right, Carl, let's talk more about the water and the surge, because we know surge has now become a bigger issue on the west coast of Florida, too.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we've got breaking news right now. This is the new storm surge forecast from the National Hurricane Center and some pretty significant changes here. Now, notice, first of all, South Florida a little bit lower there. Palm Beach and Broward counties down to 2 to 4 feet, 4 to 6. A large part of Miami-Dade County still 5 to 10 as you get down into southern Miami-Dade and out into the Keys. But here is the very big change where we were looking at 6 to 12. That has now been raised to 10 to 15 15 feet southwest Florida from Everglades City through Naples, Marco Island, and getting up into Fort Myers as well. That is a terrific amount of storm surge. This is based on the new forecast track of the storm, the trending in the models, the current position, the fact that it's going to be more coming up into the western part of the state. You do not want to be anywhere near the coast with a surge that high. You will simply not survive that if you are on the beach with a surge that high. Then 6 to 10 feet. This is another big bump up, and that extending from just north of Fort Myers towards Boca Grande, as well as our Boca Grande into Northport, Sarasota, Siesta Key, and into Bradenton as well. And another very big change was 3 to 5 feet there in Tampa and Tampa Bay. That is now 5 to 8 feet of potential storm surge. St. Pete Beach, as well as into Clearwater and Largo, and into the Tampa Bay area as well. That is a lot of surge. And again, you want to get away from the coast in those areas. Notice also 4 to 6 feet up here towards Cedar Key in the Big Bend area of Florida. 2 to 4 all the way up the east coast of Florida, and 4 to 6 in parts of Georgia and up into South Carolina. So again, we could be talking about some water levels that are rivaling what we saw with Hurricane Matthew. So in Naples, again, tremendous storm surge, up to 15 feet of surge. You just simply cannot be on the coast and expect to survive that. 100 plus mile per hour winds. That's going to be coming in late tomorrow. We look at Fort Myers. We see a very similar situation, 15-foot surge on the high end, winds gusting over 100 miles per hour. And then we take a look at Tampa, Florida, and a surge of up to 8 feet there in the surrounding area, and 100 plus mile per hour winds there in Tampa. So what exactly does that mean when we're talking about that level of surge? Well, when you've got 1 to 3 feet of surge, that is going to be enough to actually float cars and cause widespread power outages where that comes in. Then once you get to 3 to 6 feet, you're talking about life-threatening surge. You're looking at a lot of debris being picked up by all of that water. There's a tremendous amount of weight and force in that water. Could reach halfway up your front. You get up to 6 to 9 feet. That's reaching above the first floor of your home. Major damage and building destruction possible, and that can extend miles inland as well. So that's 6 to 9 feet, and we're now talking about 10 to 15 Everglades City and Fort Myers, Marco Island, and up towards and into Naples as well. 10 to 15 feet there and up to 8 feet in Tampa. So basically from southwest Florida all the way up towards Tampa, you've got a significant storm surge threat, and you've simply got to be off the coast in these areas. Storm surge warning now in effect from near Cedar Key down through Tampa Bay, right down into southwest Florida, including the Keys, and then along the east coast of Florida as well. Let's take a look at timing. This is one of our high resolution models. This is called the RPM model. And what it's showing you, first of all, is a very, very large circulation. Not the biggest we've ever seen, but it is very large. And then here you see the core of strongest winds. So that's where the very most damaging winds are. That'll be coming in overnight tonight there into the western end of the Keys. We've also got hurricane force winds starting to affect southern parts of Miami-Dade County there, getting up into Homestead. Very strong wind in southwest Florida as well. Then we take it into Sunday afternoon. Core of the storm right into Naples and Fort Myers and Marco Island, Everglades City, those areas being ravaged by wind. We see a significant water level rise as well. We also see a significant onshore flow into South Florida, and that's where we're talking about a water level rise again of about 2 to 4 feet as you get farther up the coast, 4 to 6 there in Miami, 5 to 10 southern parts of Miami-Dade County and southward. Then going into late Sunday night, very early Monday morning, that's when that eye wall is getting up into Tampa and St. Pete, so it's going to be coming in late tomorrow evening into Sarasota and into Bradenton. You've still got this big onshore flow coming up and across Florida and farther north all the way up into Georgia and South Carolina. Then we take it into Monday morning, and we're looking at hurricane force winds there in north central parts of Florida near Orlando. And take a look at the onshore flow here. This is what's got us really concerned when you're going to see this very strong wind on the back side of the circulation that's going to drive right into Tampa Bay. So it's going to be starting overnight Sunday and then going into Monday morning when we really maximize that potential for significant water level rise in Tampa and St. Pete. And again, we're talking about now 5 to 8 feet of surge in Tampa. So you have got to be off the beaches there in Tampa and St. Pete, as well as all the way down the coast. Then beyond that, we take the storm into Monday. We still see a significant onshore flow. That's why we're looking for a widespread area of 4 to 6 feet of surge in Georgia and parts of South Carolina. And then here into North Georgia, very strong northeast winds really starting to kick in late on Monday. They'll be overspreading Georgia, but you're talking about a large area where winds are going to be sustained at 40 to 50 miles per hour and then gusting as high as 70 and 80 miles per hour. That's going to bring a lot of trees down. It's going to cause widespread power outages, not just in Atlanta, but all across the southeast as the storm continues to wind down very slowly. You've got a lot of energy in that storm. It's going to take a long time for that energy to wind down. That's finally going to happen as we go into the middle of the day on Tuesday, but still a gusty day on Tuesday. So right now we're looking at a Category 3 storm with winds of 125 miles per hour. We have seen some changes here with the storm, but they're short-term changes. You notice in the satellite picture, you see much less of that high cloud there. A lot of degradation in the western semicircle, which is related to the impact, the interaction with land there in Cuba. But when you look at the core of this thing, it is very much intact. And as soon as it gets back out over the open water, it is going to take off once again in intensity. I'm sorry, we're going to now, Chris Bruin. Let's talk to Chris Bruin. He's in Tampa, Florida. And Chris, I know you're from Southwest Florida. This is an area that's had some history with hurricanes, but also a lot of surge potential there because of the nature of the sea floor, what we call the bathymetry, because it is so shallow. As you know, you can walk out a very long ways. And so we're talking about a level of storm surge that really is life-threatening in that area.
Yeah, Carl, you're hearing this from the hurricane expert himself. Again, Tampa really getting under the gun here with Irma. And again, as you mentioned, very shallow. We're right on the edge of Tampa Bay, and this is what we're worried about. This is the bay off to my right, and then it flows into downtown River. This will all be underwater with the current forecast. And as you heard from Carl, we're talking 5 to 8 feet, and that could potentially get even higher if the storm tracks right over Tampa Bay. And it really depends on exactly where that center heads, but you do not want to be in a surge-prone area as Irma makes landfall. As you can see right now, again, it's sunny. This is the time to prepare. I want to show you the Tampa Bay Times front page, and basically it's just stay safe. They want everyone heeding those evacuations. Here in Hillsborough County, we are under a mandatory evacuation beginning at 8 a.m. this morning for Zone A. We are in Zone A, and there's a Publix right across the street over here. They are going to be closing within the next hour or so as they're lifting everything off of the initial ground so things can be saved and not get inundated. This whole street, this is Bayshore Boulevard. It flows towards downtown. Is one of the most flood-prone areas in Tampa, and again, it's right along the bay, so don't take this storm surge lightly. Yeah, there's a lot of high rises, but again, we're talking winds potentially up to 120 plus here in Tampa within the next 36 to 48 hours. So again, very dangerous situation. Today's the day to finish up those preparations. Again, if you live near water, especially Zone A, listen to your officials and get out. Head to your friends or family that live out of surge-prone areas. Again, you want to get away from the water. That's the issue here in Tampa and Tampa Bay. Again, surrounded by water. In our county over, St. Petersburg, that's the one that's surrounded by water on 3 sides. You have Tampa Bay on the east side, the Gulf of Mexico on the west side, and then where Tampa Bay spills into the Gulf on the south side. So they're surrounded by water on 3 sides. And in Pinellas County, that is where we have mandatory evacuations, not only for Zone A, but Zone B as well. All of the counties here in Tampa Bay Metro dealing with mandatory evacuations. All of the barrier islands get off. The Sarasota Police Department is saying everyone needs to be evacuated on those barrier islands by 6 p.m. tonight. You must be off there. If you're risking to stay, that is not wise at all. They will not be letting anyone on the island after 6 p.m. tonight. but they will let people off of the island until the weather gets bad enough to where the bridges were closed. Keep in mind, there are so many bridges in this area. You have the Sunshine Skyway 275 that connects Bradenton over to St. Petersburg. You also have the Gandy Bridge and the Howard Franklin Bridge that connects Tampa to St. Petersburg. And those bridges will close, so that will isolate most of St. Petersburg if you get stuck there. And keep in mind, they're very low lying, and we're talking a higher storm surge now than what was originally thought. So Tampa, this could be a major storm for you in the next couple days. We're talking late tomorrow into Monday morning is when we're expecting the worst here. And keep in mind, hurricane warnings in effect, storm surge warnings in effect. And guys, a lot of people here haven't dealt with a hurricane. The last time there was a major hurricane in Tampa Bay was 1921. That's almost 100 years ago. So a lot of people may be heading inland, at least to get away from the water. And that's where we're going to find Justin Michaels in Orlando. Of course, Busch Gardens here in Tampa, Justin, is closed today, tomorrow, and Monday. Likely will extend further. Walt Disney World, we know, is closed as well. What is the sense of urgency there? You know, this is a big time storm, and with it tracking up the West Coast, Orlando will see major impacts as well, not necessarily from the storm surge, but from heavy rains and, of course, those very strong winds.
Yeah, Chris, you know, there's the potential for 8-inch rains here in Orlando from Sunday night into Monday when the bulk of Irma will be impacting Orlando. We're talking about the potential for 90 to 100 mile an hour wind gusts and also winds certainly tropical to hurricane storm force here, most definitely for the duration of the storm Sunday night into Monday. So many preparations underway here, and they have been for days. One of those, the city of Orlando actually lowered Lake Eola by about a foot, at least about 12 inches. They lowered this lake with the expectation for those torrential rains. Again, we're talking about the potential, the probability for localized flooding and the potential for 8 inches of rain overnight, Sunday into Monday. That's why they lowered it. And a guy who knows a lot about this, Wayne Meadows. Wayne, you have been in this part of the country, living here for most of your life. You were born here. You've experienced hurricane after hurricane here. Yes. Tell me, as far as hurricanes go, as far as preparations go, how do you think Orlando's doing?
Oh, I think we always do a great job because you take it serious. You know, we pull stuff off the patios, put cars in the garage, take anything that could be flying and get it secured, get it inside and or out of harm's way.
Now, Wayne, you said you live in a condominium not far from where we lots of glass frontage on that condo.
Right.
Is that a concern of yours?
Yeah, we have a concern, but we've also found out through the property manager we have safety glass. So it can take the impact, it won't shatter, it's got a lamination in it, so it'll shatter maybe, but it won't fly off and break. And that's just part of all the building codes, I'm sure, and the building's poured concrete, so we feel pretty secure in it.
Now, as far as your plans for Sunday night into Monday, with all the glass in your apartment, are you planning to change your sleeping arrangement, sleeping more interior?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't expect to sleep much to begin with, but what we can do, we'll move in a little bit just to stay away. And we have blinds that we lower down as well just to minimize any kind of debris that could potentially fall in, yes.
How many hurricanes do you think you've gone through here in Florida?
Wow. I'd say 10 to 15 maybe. I've been here since, 1957, and first big one was Hurricane Donna in '60, and just everything from then. There's been quite a few that's come up through here and or brushed the coast, and we still get the impacts here inland as well.
Well, with your experience of at least 15 hurricanes, there are a lot of people who have not lived here very long, and they're experiencing this for the very first time.
Right.
What would you say to them?
Say still take it serious, absolutely. Yeah, you've seen beer parties, liquor parties, hurricane parties, and all that, but you still have to take it serious. It's can take your life. We never take it for granted. Absolutely, you have to be serious about it. If it turns away and isn't as bad as what we think, great. Sorry for everybody else that's gotten hit, but when you know it, have the information, you have to take it serious, and we get a lot of it from you guys, and we appreciate it.
Sure. Wayne Meadows, thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise.
Yeah, good luck.
This guy is going right now to send an insurance payment in, so you get to the mailbox right now.
Absolutely.
Hey, thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. Yeah, you take care.
Right.
So again, somebody with lots of expertise, that's a good thing. And what's he telling people? Be ready. So if you're somebody who has still some preparations to do, stores really aren't going to be closing until tomorrow. Make sure you're taking these last few hours to be ready. The Weather Channel comes back with live coverage of Irma after this.
to Weather Channel's live coverage here of Hurricane Irma. You're looking at devastating footage coming out of Cuba. I mean, we are talking major damage throughout the island nation, and this is what is expected as we go towards the next couple of days here in Florida. As Irma churns closer and closer to the Sunshine State, you can just see complete devastation for as far as the eye can see, especially there right along that north coast where it did make a direct impact. And we are here in Tampa, Florida, where this is looking more and more likely to be a worst case scenario for the Tampa Bay area. Again, we've noticed that track continuing to shift west and west, and this is looking more and more likely a west coast storm. But again, don't let your guard down anywhere in the Sunshine State. But let's talk about where I am. I'm here in Tampa. We got downtown Tampa right behind me. It's definitely a lot of businesses closed today. It's a Saturday. Typically, you would have a lot of people running along Bayshore Boulevard. That's this road right off to my right. A lot of people jogging, only a handful of people out. And keep in mind, we are in Zone A right here where we are. This is under a mandatory evacuation. Even the Publix here is getting ready to close their doors. There's a long line of people getting their last minute supplies as they start to prepare the store for potential storm surge. And again, Tampa Bay is just off to my left. So we're talking very high surge rates. You saw Carl Parker in the last 30 minutes. And if you miss, they've upgraded the storm surge here to 5 to 8 feet, and I wouldn't even be surprised if that gets even higher. Keep in mind that the water will rise. This area we will be at will be underwater. And I want to go straight to Carl Parker. And Carl, you know, Tampa has not been hit hard by a major hurricane in nearly 100 years. And it really matters as far as where the worst storm surge goes, depending on the angle the storm comes in. We know a worst case scenario is for it to come in off the Gulf directly into Bay. This would come up towards the west coast into Tampa Bay. Describe some of the impacts and exactly where the eye may go and what that means here for Tampa Bay.
Yeah, so right now we think there's a very good chance that that eye wall is going to come right over the area, which we'll take a look at in a moment. And so obviously you've got significant wind impacts as that happens. It's coming right up through that 75 corridor there in southwest Florida, Marco Island into Fort Myers and Naples, on up into Sarasota and Bradenton, into Tampa and St. Pete, and then continuing up towards Cedar Key. So you get that wind damage initially, but then as that center of circulation passes just to the north, on the back side we see this flow that is driving right into the coast, and that is going to dramatically raise the water there in an area where you've got a very shallow continental shelf. That's another big part of what's going on here, the fact that you've got just a really susceptible area to storm surge flooding because of the nature of the coastline there. All out through here you've got a shallow shelf, and in fact, if you've been in the west coast of Florida, you know exactly what that looks like. There's a look at it right there. There's the shallow shelf I'm talking about. And when you go to the beach there in Tampa and St. Pete and other areas, Siesta Key, you can walk out for a very, very long way, and that allows the water to pile up a lot more readily when you've got an onshore flow, which is what we're going to be seeing for many, many hours there along the west coast of Florida. So a significant surge threat, and once again, we've seen an increase in the forecast from the National Hurricane Center going from 3 to 5 feet, now up to 5 to 8 feet there in the Tampa area. And so please listen to local officials. If you are right on the coast, you're simply not going to be able to survive that. And keep in mind, when the surge gets up to 6 to 9 feet, it can actually penetrate well inland as well. There are the storm surge warnings now in effect from Cedar Key down across the west coast into the Keys, and then up the east coast as well. Big onshore flow along the east coast. And so you've got raised values all the way around now along the west coast and the southwest coast of Florida. These are the same in the Keys, 5 to 10 feet. That is significant. The elevations are not a lot higher than that, and in fact lower than that in a lot of cases there in the Keys. And then here you see 10 to 15 feet of surge. That is just unbelievable. Marco Island, I think, being hit exceptionally hard by the storm, as well as Naples and Fort Myers. 6 to 10 feet of surge as you get farther up the coast there, getting into Bradenton, Sarasota, Siesta Key, and into Englewood and all those areas. Again, life-threatening storm surge. And then in this major metro area, 5 to 8 feet of surge in the Tampa metro area. And then farther north, we're looking for 4 to 6 along the coast, Cedar Key, and then 4 to 6 getting up into parts of Georgia and South Carolina. So this may rival what you saw with Hurricane Matthew in some parts of Georgia and South Carolina. Naples, storm surge up to 15 feet. You do not want to mess with that. You've simply just got to get away from the coast and well inland as well, because again, a surge like that can penetrate well inland, in some cases miles, depending on the nature of the terrain. And we see a similar forecast for Fort Myers with 100+ mile-per-hour winds. We have seen a slight reduction in the intensity of this storm. It's now Category 3 with winds of 125 miles per hour. You can really see a change in the nature of the satellite presentation over the last 12 hours because of interaction with land. You see a lot less of high cloud there on the west side, the western semicircle in particular. But when we zoom in and look at the storm, and you look at the core of the storm, it is very much intact. This thing has been going for a long, long time, and even this interaction with land is not really going to slow it down. And on top of that, as it begins to pull away from Cuba, and right now it appears to be tracking along the coast. See, the nature of the coastline is moving towards the west-northwest. It seems to be tracking right along with that. So I think we've got a little of a north component to that motion there. You see that it's going to be moving over areas where you've got water temperatures that are in the upper 80s and lower 90s. That is way more than what is necessary to sustain a storm like this. And for that reason, it is expected that it will be a Category 4 storm. But keep in mind, there are intensity errors all the time, so we could be talking about something stronger than that. It's possible that it once again becomes a Category 5 as it comes up along the coast, especially if it stays farther offshore longer. And that is going to devastate the Keys in southwest Florida, all the way up into Tampa and into the Big Bend area of Florida as well. But we will see impacts. Well, coverage of Hurricane Irma on the Weather Channel continues right now. Coverage of Hurricane Irma on the Weather Channel continues right now.
The Weather Channel started talking about this storm far enough out. They heeded our warning.
All right, time is running out here as Irma is now headed towards the Sunshine State, and it's really looking like a worst case scenario up and down the west coast from Naples to Fort Myers, Sarasota, Bradenton, and here in Tampa. We need to hunker down. Now, you still have time. Weather, you've still got blue skies. I want to pan up here to the left. You can quickly see the clouds. These are just the beginnings of what is going to be increase in the weather here. And we are really concerned in Tampa Bay of the storm surge. And again, the latest update now has it at 5 to 8 feet, but that could easily get higher. And where we are here in downtown Tampa, right along Tampa Bay and the Hillsborough River, where the river spills into the bay and eventually spills out to the Gulf of Mexico. This is under a mandatory evacuation, and I want to show you the front page here of the Tampa Bay Times. Stay safe. That is really what you need to do. If you live in Zone A, and they may expand these evacuations as we go closer, especially with the new track and the latest update as Irma gets closer to the Sunshine State, you need to heed those orders. You want to run away from the water. Storm surge is no laughing matter, and again, it's the #1 killer here, water-related deaths. You can hide from the winds, but it's the storm surge that's going to pose the biggest threat, including here in Tampa, right where we are. And I want to bring in Carl Parker. And again, you just showed us the update about 25 minutes ago of the new totals, especially along the west coast. What is that update here, Carl?
Well, the update is 5 to 8 feet of storm surge, and that's going to be across the Tampa metro area. Then we're looking at 6 to 10 as you get farther down the coast into Sarasota and Bradenton and right down into Evergreen, and then even more than that. I'll show you the forecast right now. This is the new forecast from the National Hurricane Center, and so all of these values have been raised because of this track, which now drives right up and along the west coast. We're going to get that surge initially as it's coming in, but then also on the back backside. And in fact, that's going to be the most important element here for some areas as the center of circulation is moving off to the north of that. And so 5 to 8 feet, that's a really big deal in Tampa. If you've spent any time at the beaches there, Tampa and on southward, you know that you can walk out in the water for quite some distance because it's got a very shallow continental shelf that goes off for quite a ways here, and that allows the water to pile up even more so than it would if the seafloor were to drop off very quickly. So we've got 6 to 10 feet of potential surge. Sarasota, Bradenton into Siesta Key, farther down the coast, getting down into Englewood here. And then also we're looking at a significant, tremendous surge in Fort Myers and Naples, Marco Island, and then getting down towards Everglades City as well, looking at 10 to 15 feet of surge there. You just do not want to be anywhere near the ocean in that case. And we're not talking about just right on the coast. We're also talking about being away from the coast as well. Let's take a look right now at what's going on with the storm and the wind that's starting to come in already. And so we've got some wind that's already getting up to tropical storm force, and that is now sustained in the Keys. In some cases there, we're certainly gusting up to tropical storm force. And as these bands continue to drive through like that, you'll see winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour and higher. The wind is necessarily going to be stronger aloft, and so where you get heavier rain and stronger thunderstorms, it's going to bring that momentum down to the ground, which is exactly what we have seen here. Even though the center of the circulation is a pretty long way off, it's now right along the coast of Cuba, so it's more than 100 miles away from the Keys, but already we're starting to get those tropical storm force winds sustained at some times and certainly in gusts. So right now a Category 3 storm with winds of 125 miles per hour. It's moving towards the west now, although I think we're seeing a little more of a west-northwest component, and we expect that turn to continue. And because the storm is going to be solidly back out over the open water, it is expected that it will strengthen. The official forecast calling for a solid Category 4 storm to start affecting the Keys, leading up into southwest Florida tomorrow morning, but it could West Florida tomorrow morning, but it could be even stronger than that, and it's just going to rake the west coast of Florida. But keep in mind,
in our state, South Florida is already experiencing tropical storm force winds, and nearly 25,000 people have already lost power. Hurricane Irma is battering the South Florida and the Florida Keys with dangerous winds and continues to remain a catastrophic and life-threatening major Category 3 storm with winds of 125 miles per hour. This is a deadly major storm, and our state has never seen anything like it. Millions of Floridians will see major hurricane impacts with deadly, deadly, deadly storm surge and life-threatening winds. There is a serious threat of significant storm surge flooding. There is a serious threat of significant storm surge flooding along the entire west coast of Florida, and this has increased to 15 feet of impact above ground level. 15 feet of impact above ground level. Think about that. 15 feet is devastating and will cover your house. In the Tampa Bay area, the surge is forecasted to be 5 to 8 feet. Think about that. The typical first story is 7 to 10 feet, 5 to 8 feet. This is a life-threatening situation. Remember, the storm surge comes after the wind. Do not think the storm is over when the wind slows down. Local officials will let you know when it's safe. The storm surge will rush in and it could kill you. Here in Orange County, you're under a hurricane warning, and we'll see dangerous and life-threatening wind and torrential rainfall of more than a foot. The rainfall has already started in this area, and the wind will begin tonight. We could also see tornadoes. Please take action to keep your family safe and shelter in place or find shelter now. There is a mandatory evacuation order for mobile homes in Orange County. If you have been ordered to evacuate anywhere in the state, you need to leave right now. Not tonight, not in an hour, now. You are running out of time to make a decision. Evacuations are in place across the state. More than 6.3 million Floridians have been ordered to evacuate. You need to listen to local evacuation orders. I'm a dad and I'm a grandfather. I love my family more than anything, and I cannot imagine life without them. Do not put your life or your family's life at risk. Right now is the right time to do the right thing for your family. School buses are aiding in evacuations. Please take advantage of this service. If you need to leave and are unable to do so for any reason at all, call 1-800-342-3557. I'm sorry, 1-800-342-3557, and we will do everything possible to get you out. Protecting life is our absolute top priority. There will be no resource, there will be no expense that will be spared to protect lives. I urge everyone to check on your neighbors, families, and friends. If you know someone who is not evacuating and should, please contact them and make sure they have a plan to get to safety. But you can't wait to get out. You can't wait until the storm's here. You've got to do it now. Possessions can be replaced. Your house can be replaced. You and your family cannot be replaced. Shelters. We have been working with counties across the state to ensure there are enough shelters. Currently, there are more than 320 shelters open across every county in the path of the storm, and more are opening today. More than 54,000 Floridians have already taken shelter, and there's still room for more. If you have a building and emergency officials ask you to open a shelter, please comply. You will save somebody's life. This is so important to families seeking safety. Everyone in Florida needs to find a safe place to go. Traffic. Evacuation routes are moving, and we have stopped the shoulder driving on I-75 from Wildwood to the Georgia line because traffic is moving. If there's a need to reopen this, FDOT and Highway Safety will do so immediately. Evacuations are not meant to be convenient. Check real-time traffic information and evacuation routes at fl511.com. Fuel. We are still aggressively working to keep gas stations open and filled. But this won't last much longer in South Florida because it will be unsafe to be on the roads. While all the fuel ports in Florida are now closed for safety as Irma impacts our state, following the storm, state troopers will resume escorting fuel supply trucks directly to gas stations across the state. I waived Florida motor fuel import tax for 5 days to help bring more fuel to our state for storm response and recovery. This will make our efforts to bring more fuel into our state help us bring more fuel from other states, neighboring states after the storm. We know fuel is important. We're doing everything we can to get more fuel in the state. Florida's prepared. Every single Florida Guardsman that can be deployed has already been deployed to prepare and respond to this storm across the state. We have so many members of our law enforcement that are putting their lives at risk to help Floridians get to a safe place, and they will not stop until it is no longer safe. We cannot thank our Guardsmen, we can't thank our law enforcement, we can't thank any of our first responders enough because they're putting themselves at risk to take care of everybody else. Utility providers, they're actively pre-positioning resources throughout the state and in neighboring states. We all know the importance of getting power back on. We will work aggressively with our utilities to make sure it gets back on as quickly as we can. I want to be clear. We are under a state of emergency. Employees who perform vital services, including healthcare staff, we need you to be there to help your community. Right now, Florida needs 1,000 volunteer nurses to help at our special needs shelters. If you are a nurse, please, and you can volunteer, please email at HELP, helpfl at flhealth.gov. So helpfl@flhealth.gov. You can still email to the prior email address we were using, BPRCHD preparedness at flhealth.gov. Again, we need nurses. We need nurses for our special needs shelters. We've already received thousands of replies. This is great news, but we're still actively to try to get these individuals to our shelters. We're also going to continue to need volunteers before and after the storm. So many people across the country and across the world have called to offer their prayers and support. I want to thank the governors of the other states that provided every resource we've asked for. I know the entire country is behind us. I've been talking to the White House pretty much every day. I've been talking to FEMA all the time. I talked to Brock Long this morning, FEMA administrator. I've talked to almost every cabinet member, and they're doing everything they can to provide whatever resource they can. We have our country's best first responders ready to help us, and Florida will get through this. If you're in an evacuation zone, you've got to go. You've got to get out now, get to a safe place. This is a catastrophic storm their state has never seen. Let's remember, we can rebuild your house, you can get your possessions again. We can't rebuild your life, and we can't rebuild your family. Florida is tough, Florida is resilient, Florida is unbreakable. Let's stay together and help each other. You can follow my Twitter account at FLGovScott for life safety messaging and updates in English and Spanish. Florida is an amazing melting pot of loving people, and I'm so proud to be governor of this incredible state. Huracán Irma ya está impactando nuestro estado. Este huracán es muy peligroso. Acuérdense que la vida de usted y su familia es lo más importante. Por favor, tengan cuidado.
All right, that is Florida Governor Rick Scott talking about urgent need for volunteers as this storm is going to be affecting the entire state of Florida, minus perhaps some areas of the far western panhandle. And the warnings certainly reflect that. This is the new hurricane warning out from the National Hurricane Center, which covers the entire peninsula of Florida. So this is where hurricane force winds are expected. They're moving in as early as this evening across parts of far South Florida, including the Keys, and then will overspread South Florida into early tomorrow morning. Then to the north of that, you see there are hurricane watches up into South Georgia, coastal areas of South Carolina, and reaching a little farther west as well. Tropical storm watches to the north of that. Here is the forecast track and intensities. Looking for a Category 4 storm to come up and across the state of Florida. This could be devastating from Naples up into Sarasota, Bradenton, and Tampa. And then beyond that, a significant storm moving. Power outages are likely in these areas. And this is a large circulation with an enormous area of tropical storm force winds 200 miles out from the center of that circulation. Let's get out to Chris Bruin right now. He is in Tampa, Florida. And Chris, this is going to be a really big deal there in Tampa. And there's a lot of concern about the level of storm surge that we're now expecting with this sort of late shift in the model guidance with the westward motion of the storm that continued a little longer than had been previously thought. And so now we're looking at a situation where you could be talking about life-threatening storm surge in these coastal areas of Tampa. And folks that are on the beach are going to be in a real jam if they stay there.
Yeah, absolutely, Carl. And again, with the latest update, it's still not too late to get out of here. We're still, weather's fine for now, but that will change very quickly as we head into the overnight hours tonight and then throughout the day tomorrow. So you want to get out and about. We want to bring in Pinellas County, which is the county next to us. This includes St. Pete and Clearwater. We want to bring in the Pinellas County Administrator, Mark Woodard. And Mark, thanks for joining us. I want to ask you, what is your county doing? I know Zone A and Zone B under mandatory evacuations there in St. Petersburg. What do you want to urge residents as they now may or may not be on the cusp of leaving?
Well, you're correct. We've declared a mandatory evacuation for both A and B levels, as well as all mobile home residents throughout all of the county. We are encouraging our residents to heed the warnings. This is a strong, dangerous storm. It is forecast to have a dramatic impact on our area. We, the county, our 24 municipalities here in Pinellas County and our various other governmental partners have been prepared and have been preparing for this storm now for the better part of a week. And now it's the turn of the public to assume that responsibility and take personal responsibility for their safety and for their possessions.
And Mark, again, Pinellas County, unlike Hillsborough County, we only have to really worry about Tampa Bay and the Hillsborough River. You not only have Tampa Bay, you're surrounded by water on three sides. Keep in mind the Gulf of Mexico is on your west side, and there's only so many routes out of St. Pete and Clearwater. Of course, you have the Sunshine Skyway and the other bridges. What is the latest? When will those bridges close for people to get out? So again, what's the latest as far as the closures go? Obviously, all the roads are open, but what will it take for those bridges to get closed?
Chris, I don't have that information available. We've been working with the Sheriff Galtieri, the Pinellas County Sheriff, on those matters. But you're absolutely right. Florida is a peninsula, and Pinellas County is a peninsula on that peninsula. We are subject to storm surge impacts from the Gulf and certainly Tampa Bay. We have a current forecast of a storm surge of 3 to 5 feet, but with the expectation that that estimate could double with even a slight shift in the track of Irma to the west. For us, the worst impact from the storm surge will be on the back end of the storm. So we're estimating, based upon the current forecast track, that impact will affect us from about 2 to 10 p.m. on Monday. With respect
to Mark, is there any question for you? Is there any chance that any more zones will be added to this mandatory evacuation, especially with the track now trending more towards the Tampa Bay area?
You know, that is certainly not anticipated in the current forecast, Chris. So I would say for now the answer to that is no. We believe that an evacuation level B here in Pinellas County will keep our residents safe. We have opened an enhanced number of shelters. So we do have 16 shelters open at this point in time. That will accommodate the individuals that we project would come out of those Zone A and B areas, special needs. But we've also added a little bit of capacity for those individuals who might not feel safe in their homes, given that we're forecast to experience hurricane force winds for about 9 hours and tropical force winds for about 24 hours.
All right, I really appreciate your time. Mark Woodard, that is the Pinellas County Administrator. Appreciate it. Stay safe. And again, we'll keep you up to date with the latest. Now, here in Tampa, this is the biggest threat, the storm surge. We're in a Zone A evacuation here where we are. Everything you see along the water is under Zone A mandatory evacuation. So again, it's the storm surge. Prediction now 5 to 8 feet, and that could potentially even get higher. And keep in mind, Tampa Bay is just to my left. We'll pan over. Not a lot of boats out, a lot of people getting their boats out. And another interesting thing, I was talking to some locals yesterday when I was flying in here. They said they noticed a lot of the birds have already left. Now we see a couple, but typically you would have a ton of seagulls and a lot of birds. And it just is kind of odd how there aren't that many birds out and about. So not only are the humans taking this seriously, but the birds are fleeing out ahead, and animals definitely can sense those pressure changes well in advance of humans as well. And again, not only multi-million-dollar yachts to my left, but we've got high rises here in downtown Tampa. This is the Tampa Bay Convention Center. And again, it's pretty much, it's a Saturday. You would have a lot of people here, but a lot of people have definitely evacuated or are on the verge. And keep in mind, you still have time to get out, but it's where you go. You don't have to go far. You don't have to go super far to get out of town. But if you do, keep in mind you're risking the chance of a lot of traffic. You only have to go to where you feel safe. Run from the water and then find a sturdy structure to ride out the winds. But we want to go inland now. So we're near the coast here in Tampa Bay. We want to go to Orlando, where there are a lot of people riding out the storm. Of course, they're away from the water. But Justin, it's going to be pretty destructive in Orlando as well, especially with the winds and trees. Let's talk about trees that could potentially fall over, and especially on mobile homes and weak structures, that could pose a big hazard going forward.
Yeah, Chris, preparation is absolutely key. Heeding evacuation orders is absolutely key. You heard the governor talking about that just a few moments ago, about how important it is, if you have an evacuation order, you need to leave. Because if you don't leave, you're putting first responders' lives at risk to get to you in the event that you need to be rescued. So preparation is absolutely key, and that's especially true if you're living in a mobile home, because of how dangerous those can be in the winds we're talking about. Here in Orlando, we're talking about hurricane storm force winds when this thing ramps up, gusts upwards of 100 miles an hour, and the potential for 8 inches of rain. Because of that, Lake Eola has been lowered by 12 inches by the city of Orlando. Now let's go over here and talk to Walter. Walter just moved back to Orlando 3 weeks ago.
Right, exactly.
Walter, are you happy you came?
I am. You know, my son and my granddaughter live here, so I'm happy to be with them and to be able to help them out and help them weather the storm.
Well, Walter, what are you doing? You used to live here, so you've experienced tropical weather before. You moved away for a few years, but you're back. What are you doing to prepare?
Well, just getting food and water and batten down the hatches a bit. You know, all of the lawn chairs and that sort of thing, we're bringing them inside, putting them in the garage, putting up some paneling along the windows and that sort of thing. So that's about the most that you can do right now, you know. So we're just trying to prepare. You know, God loves preparation, so we're just trying to prepare for the storm.
Walter, you be safe, and thank you for your time. Best to your family. Make sure they're safe too. Thank you so much for stopping by and talking with us. And Walter touched on something very important: things like chairs, lawn chairs, things in your yard, potted plants. I can tell you, Florida Department of Transportation moved all the cones and other things off of construction zones on the highway, like those barrels. They're all gone. Make sure you're putting all that stuff in a safe place so it can't go around and hit somebody like a first responder if they're out. The Weather Channel comes back live after this with more Irma coverage.
Welcome back. We are following severe weather right now associated with Hurricane Irma. This is a tornado warning for Collier County that's going until 12:30. We were looking at a very strong circulation now showing up just to the east of Everglades City. Now, there has been a mandatory evacuation issued for the area, but if you are still here, very strong circulation now just about on top of Everglades City. If you're still there, please do take cover immediately, as that is now moving into Everglades City. And looking at the larger picture, we see what we often see with storms like this, and that is a lot of shear in the atmosphere, winds coming out of different directions at different levels of the atmosphere. There's the surface flow, and there's the flow coming out of the east at about a mile up in the atmosphere. With that level of turning of winds, you've got a tornado threat and a tornado watch that goes until midnight tonight for South Florida, including the Keys. And right now we've got a torcon of 6 in South Florida. That means a 60% chance of a tornado within a 50-mile radius. Let's get out to Chris Bruin now, who is following the preparations in Tampa, where we've got an increased risk for storm surge per the National Hurricane Center within the last couple of hours. Chris?
Hey, Carl. Yeah, we're here in Tampa. And again, storm surge is the biggest issue. I want to bring in the mayor of Tampa and what he has to say. Hey, Mayor Bob Buckhorn, appreciate you joining us. What do you want your residents to know? Again, of course, a lot of people here haven't really dealt with a direct hit potentially from a major hurricane in years.
Chris, we haven't taken a direct hit in over 90 years, so this is a big deal for us. This is a big, bad storm. Our folks, we've been prepping them all week long. We've evacuated those low-lying areas in flood zone A. I mean, my family has left, but this storm is changing before our eyes, and so every time it moves a little bit further to the west, we are at greater risk. So we are constantly driving home the message to leave if you can. You don't have to go to a different state. Just move to a higher flood level zone. Secure your belongings. You know, put those chairs in the pool. Take those plants off the pool deck. Get rid of those wind chimes. We don't want projectiles flying around. It's going to be a windy, rainy night coming up tomorrow night. And that storm surge that you talked about is going to coincide with a high tide on Monday morning, early Monday morning. So that's where you'll see some of the water push up through the bay in those low-lying areas.
And you brought in a good point. Again, high tide. We have a full moon as well. That's only going to add to the extra tide, the higher tide, along with the storm surge, with this expected to move through the Tampa area overnight tomorrow night. And again, is there any preparations as potentially adding any more zones to the mandatory evacuation, especially with the increase in storm surge?
Well, we're looking at that right now. We're monitoring the National Weather Service. There is a potential that we would go to a level B. We're waiting to see right now how that shapes and what the storm is doing. Certainly level A, which is largely Davis Island, Harbor Island, Bayshore Boulevard, where I think you are, those would be affected. So those folks need to take precautions, move to higher ground, make sure your house is secure, and then hope and pray that the storm stays away.
Mayor, a question for you. What do you think about people in these high rises? A lot of condos, a lot of people here. These are in zone A, so under a mandatory evacuation, but people that live on the 10th, 12th, 17th floor, what do you want them to do? A lot of them planning on riding out the storm. Of course, they'll be well above the water, but then you have to add in the wind aspect. What do you want people in high rises to know, especially those who are in these mandatory evacuation zones?
Well, my preference would be that they go to someplace else. I mean, if you can't go up further because you only add to the potential risk. If you have storm shutters, deploy them. If you have the ability to sort of board up your windows right now, do it. But the best thing that they can do, given what is coming and given the velocity of those winds, is to go to a different flood zone. It could be right up the street. It could be a couple blocks away. But take the appropriate precautions, because we just don't know what this storm is about to do to us.
And Mayor, how are shelters? How are shelters doing? I know in other counties, a lot of them are at max capacity, and there's very few that are opening that have room for more evacuees. How are shelters here in Hillsborough County and throughout the city of Tampa managing? Is there still plenty of room for people that want to get out of harm's way to go to a safe spot in a shelter? Is there still plenty of room for them? And are you planning on opening any more shelters?
Well, that's not the city's function. That's Hillsborough County. From what I understand, there is still room. We've identified and outfitted 14 different shelters. Obviously, I don't think anybody could have predicted that westward jog of this storm. So there are some folks who are probably caught unaware and looking for options. You can go to the county website to find out the locations of those shelters. My suggestion would be, if that is what you are considering, do it as soon as possible. We have about a 24-hour window here, but if you can get there now, I would absolutely do it.
Hey, Mayor, appreciate your time here on the Weather Channel. And again, stay safe, keep your residents safe, and keep doing what you all have been doing to keep everyone out of harm's way. Appreciate it. And again, the storm surge, really the biggest concern here. I kind of want to pan over to the Tampa Bay. This is the mouth of the Hillsborough River, and it flows into Tampa Bay. And right now, I could stand here in the water. It's about maybe a foot deep, but it's only 6 feet from the edge of this seawall here along Bayshore Boulevard. And with a forecast right now of 5 to 8 feet, this will all be underwater when the storm moves in. So this is why it's such a serious threat. Very shallow shelf here, and water can rise very quickly. And I want to bring in Carl Parker, again, very shallow throughout Tampa Bay and then Hillsborough River. Storm surge here is a big deal. We're talking life-threatening, and again, with the latest update, 5 to 8 feet. Is there a potential for that to get even higher?
Well, I suppose that could be the case. I mean, that is certainly a really significant surge that we're looking at, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I've been to Reddington Beach, and you can walk out for a very, very long ways. You can go out for maybe 100 yards or more before you get into water that is up to your neck. It's amazing how shallow it is, and so in an environment like that, with a seafloor like that, that piles up the water a lot more readily than does a situation where you've got the seafloor dropping off very quickly. So there's huge concern about surge along the west coast of Florida. I want to show you the radar picture right now, and you see where that center of circulation is now beginning to move off the coast of Cuba, and well ahead of that, more than 100 miles away, we've got winds that are now gusting to tropical storm force from Miami and all the way down the Keys here in a marathon into Key West. You've necessarily got stronger winds coming in aloft, and as a result, where you see these banding features that are starting to move in, they're going to bring that momentum down. So we've seen winds gusting over 60 miles per hour as some of those bands of showers and storms have come through. Here is the new advisory from the National Hurricane Center. 125 mile per hour Category 3 storm. We did see some weakening as a result of some tangling with land there in Cuba. You can see a little bit of a degradation of the cloud all the way around. But one thing that has really not changed is the structure of the core of this storm. This has been an incredibly powerful and large circulation for a long time now, and the core of that storm is very much on track to continue to maintain and actually gain strength as it comes back out over the open water, over the Florida Straits, where you've got exceptionally warm water temperatures. And we've seen this shift in the guidance now to the west because it did move a little farther to the west than had been initially anticipated. And that changes everything in terms of the amount of water that it's going to be bringing into the coast. You're talking about tremendous surge along the west coast here, 10 to 15 feet southwest Florida from Everglades City up into Naples, Marco Island. You would not want to be anywhere near Marco Island with a 10 to 15 foot storm surge. You're taking your life into your own hands if you're on the coast with that level of surge. That's coming up into Fort Myers, then farther to the north as we move up into Sarasota and Bradenton, Siesta Key as well. We're looking at 6 to 10 feet of surge, and then 5 to 8 there in the Tampa area. And so please, please listen to local officials and what they say about whether or not you've got to get out of your particular area. And you've got a big flow coming up here into Georgia and South Carolina as well, in the Big Bend area of Florida. And so there too, we're going to see significant surge. So in Tampa, we've got up to 8 feet of potential surge there on the high end. And we're also looking for winds gusting to 100 miles per hour. So significant impacts in terms of wind damage as well. Same story there in Naples, surge up to 15 feet and 100 plus mile per hour wind. It could be well above that. As a matter of fact, winds could be gusting as high as 130, 140 miles per hour. Now, here's a high-resolution model forecast, and we may see some deviation in the ultimate track of the storm, but this is meant to illustrate how this is going to go down, roughly speaking. And again, you see the very large circulation here with the tropical storm force winds already now beginning to move in. We take this forward, and that most dangerous core of the storm will be moving into the Keys, the middle and lower Keys in particular, overnight tonight and very early tomorrow morning. So tremendous surge there, 5 to 10 feet, and also we'll be looking at tremendous wind damage across the Keys. And then you've also got winds really starting to pick up in South Florida at that time. Then into tomorrow afternoon, very dangerous core of the storm coming up into Naples and Marco Island and into Fort Myers and Port Charlotte and all of those areas. We're going to be looking at widespread, significant wind damage, water piling up along the coast here, getting into South Florida, a tremendous onshore flow into South Florida, and also winds really starting to gust to hurricane force all across South Florida on the eastern side of the state, even though the core of the storm is farther west. So you're not seeing the very worst of the weather from the storm, but believe me, it is going to be bad in southern parts of Florida, Broward, Miami-Dade, and Palm Beach counties. And then here into Monday overnight, this is 1 o'clock in the morning, we're starting to see that eye wall coming in. And again, there could be some changes in the exact timing or exact position of the storm, but this is meant to give you a rough idea of how that's going to go down. And take a look also at the flow on the underside of that circulation. So this is when we're really maximizing that surge going into late tomorrow and overnight tomorrow into Monday morning, maximizing that surge in Southwest Florida, in Naples, and down towards Everglades City. And you've also got a very large area of water level rise and wave action coming up along the east coast of Florida. Then we go into Monday morning, and we see hurricane force winds coming up into central parts of Florida, in Orlando, and farther off towards the north there into Leesburg, into the Villages. Winds could gust well over hurricane force in those areas. And at this time, we're starting to see that flow on the underside of the circulation coming up farther along the coast, getting into Siesta Key, into Bradenton, into Sarasota, starting to get into Tampa. So this is roughly the time frame when we see these really significant water level rises. And obviously, with hurricane force winds at that time, that's the last time you're going to want to try to get away from the water. So please do listen to your local officials and make sure you do get away from the coast there as the storm is approaching. And then as you got, or well before the storm approaches, I should say, and then going into Monday evening, here we see a very significant onshore flow in Georgia and South Carolina, and we also see strong winds coming up into North Georgia and through a lot of the southeast. So even though it's not going to be necessarily a hurricane as it's coming up through North Georgia, it's probably going to be transitioning to a tropical storm from South Georgia into North Georgia. What we will see is sustained winds of perhaps 40, 50 miles per hour more, and then winds gusting to 70, 80 miles per hour. So you're talking about widespread power outages, trees down, a lot of disruption across the southeast. This area of large winds is actually going to be getting larger as the storm is transitioning away from being a tropical system and starting to take on some non-tropical characteristics. One of the things that we see with that is a much larger area of wind. So with all that in mind, there's a look at the warnings that are now in effect, hurricane warnings across the entire state of Florida, and there are hurricane watches that now extend up into Georgia. This is not a function of the level of impact, it's a function of time. And so those hurricane watches could very well change to hurricane warnings. We expect that in a hurricane warning, hurricane force winds are expected inside of 36 hours, with a hurricane watch there possible inside of 48 hours. So looking at the timing of all this is when we expect all of the weather to move in. And it's already starting now to come into South Florida. Already we're getting those tropical storm force winds in South Florida. They'll be moving up into Naples, West Palm Beach, Broward County there by this evening. So by that time, you've got to be where you're going to be sheltering. You cannot be out and about. And keep in mind that local officials have said that their public safety officers are going to be recalled once we get into tropical storm force winds. So they're going to be a lot less available to help you once those winds really start to kick in. Then farther to the north, Sunday, 8 o'clock in the morning, that's when we see the tropical storm force winds getting up towards Bradenton, Sarasota, Fort Myers, and getting up towards Tampa and St. Pete. And then during the day on Sunday, tropical storm force winds start to get up to Orlando, and eventually we are going to see hurricane force winds there in Orlando. And let's get out to Justin Michaels. He is now in the Orlando metro area. And Justin, this is going to be a really significant storm well inland with a widespread wind impacts. You know, it's not just a coastal affair. This is something that's going to have a big impact there in Orlando.
Well, Carl, and I have a question for you just about something we've been experiencing since we got here. When we showed up here today, we had beautiful blue skies, no wind whatsoever. The wind has picked up here in Orlando significantly since we got here. And in fact, looking over Lake Eola, you can see the fountain is blowing in a certain direction. Well, just so you know, you're facing east right now. Is this at all related to Irma, this wind that has been picking up and building throughout the day?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's some wind that is related to some extent with the high pressure that is off to the north of you. So there's what we call a gradient wind. It's a difference in pressure between the hurricane and the high pressure that's off to the north. So that's a part of it, certainly. But we're seeing the strong winds now overspreading South Florida, and it's only going to continue to ramp up through the day. So yes, I think you're getting these sort of far fringe effects of the storm already.
All right, and one more question before I let you go here. We've had several different people come up to us here and talk about, hey, the storm shifted west. It's shifted west. We're going to be okay, right? And, you know, we're hearing that a lot. Hearing it from you is a lot more important than hearing it from me. I mean, you're the storm specialist. You're a meteorologist. I mean, what would you say to people who walk up to you and say, hey, it's shifted west, right? It's okay here.
Yeah, it's really important to understand exactly what the cone means. So we're looking at the forecast track, what we call the cone from the Hurricane Center. This is showing you where the most likely positions of the center of the storm will be, and that's right down the middle of this cone. The reason why it widens out over time is to account for forecast errors that occur over time. They grow larger over time. This is not an impacts cone. This is not showing you where you're going to get impacts. It does not mean that the impacts are now just going to be on the west coast of Florida and not on the east coast. It does mean that the very worst impacts are more likely on the west coast of Florida, but certainly we are going to see impacts that are well outside of that cone. And as a matter of fact, I can show you the wind field, which is very, very large. Tropical storm force winds extending out 200 miles from the center and hurricane force winds extending out 70 miles from the center. So that's well above average in terms of size. And let's go back and take a look at where that's going to be headed here in the next few minutes. And you see that very large area. This is all the tropical storm force wind that's going to be coming up and across the region. So look how much larger than the state of Florida that is. You're going to have tropical storm force wind that's well outside of the state. And this is what we mean by that. This is why this is going to be such a long lasting event. And looking at where that wind field is going to go, there's the hurricane. So that's the sustained wind in red there in southwest Florida. That's into tomorrow afternoon. This is the very worst of the storm. These are hurricane force wind gusts getting solidly into South Florida. So you're not in the cone in South Florida, but you're going to be getting into significant wind that will cause damage and will drop trees. And then you've got these tropical storm force winds that will extend well outside of that. We take it into tomorrow evening, and you see the entire southern half, more, maybe 2/3 of the state, looking at hurricane force wind gusts by tomorrow evening. Justin, back out to you.
All right, Carl Parker, hey, thanks so much for the explanation, and just trying to get through people's heads. It's very important they be ready all across this entire peninsula for what is going to be a major hurricane, east, west, south. Make sure you're ready. And because of what Carl was just talking about and the expected effects, the probable effects here in Orlando, plenty of closures, including at the Magic Kingdom. Walt Disney World is closing at 9 o'clock tonight. Universal Orlando closes at 7 o'clock tonight. Orlando International Airport stopping all flights out of Orlando at 5 o'clock tonight. Of course, all public schools, universities, colleges all closed, and even SeaWorld Orlando and Busch Gardens Tampa Bay, they are going to be closing at 5 o'clock tonight. So if all those major places are closing down, remember, this is a very serious storm, and it's so important that if there is an evacuation where you are, you heed those warnings. Get out. Don't stay. Don't take it upon yourself, because you're putting other people's lives in risk. Remember that. You have people that might need to save you, the first responders and the guardsmen and women who could have to come in and save you. So please leave if there are evacuation orders. Of course, the Weather Channel will continue extensive coverage of Hurricane Irma as it approaches Florida after this.
There is a serious threat of significant storm surge flooding along the entire west coast of Florida, and this has increased to 15 feet of impact above ground level. 15 feet of impact above ground level. Think about that. 15 feet is devastating and will cover your house. In the Tampa Bay area, the surge is forecasted to be 5 to 8 feet. Think about that. The typical first story is 7 to 10 feet, 5 to 8 feet. This is a life-threatening situation. Remember, the storm surge comes after the wind. Do not think the storm is over when the wind slows down.
All right, you heard it from himself, the governor of Florida. We're talking potentially upwards of 15 feet, especially there in the southwest coast of Florida. And that is storm surge. That's above ground level. Keep in mind the water rise will be even higher. So we want to clarify, 5 to 8 feet, 5 to 8 feet storm surge here in Tampa Bay. That would be above ground level. And again, as the governor said, that could cover your whole first floor and start to get into the second floor. That is why mandatory evacuations here where we are in Tampa, downtown Tampa, right behind me. We're talking to see 3 million people. The last time Tampa has seen a major hurricane was nearly 100 years ago in 19. I haven't ridden out a storm, especially of this magnitude. So a lot of urgency here, not only by the mayor, but by the governor. So if you're on the cusp, keep in mind, you still have time to evacuate, especially if you are near a storm surge prone area. They're still debating on whether they want to include Zone B here in Hillsborough County, but Zone A is under mandatory evacuation. This will be underwater in 36 hours from now. But Carl, I want to bring in, we're talking 5 to 8 feet potential storm surge here as Irma gets closer. I mean, that's just devastating news here for the Tampa Bay area.
Yeah, that's right. And storm surge is really a function of how large a system is. And this is a very large system that's going to be getting larger as it comes up and across the state over the next couple of days. And that's a big part of why we have this significant storm surge threat. Now, let's give you the latest on the storm. Now at Category 3 with 125-mile-per-hour winds. There's been some interaction with land there in Cuba, which is why it weakened a bit, but we don't expect that to last as it's going to move back out over the open water and we'll have every opportunity to strengthen back to a solid Category 4. It could get even stronger than that depending on just how far offshore it is. This is likely going to devastate parts of the Keys here as well as southwest Florida, Marco Island, Naples, Fort Myers, getting up towards Bradenton, Sarasota, Siesta Key, into Tampa as well, and then up towards the Big Bend area of Florida and even farther inland, as far inland as Orlando. There could be very significant wind, hurricane force easily and perhaps a good bit higher than that. Then the storm comes up into North Georgia. You notice that it will weaken significantly between Monday and Tuesday, but it's going to be a solid storm as it moves up into the central part of Georgia. And again, you've got an enormous area of strong wind here. The tropical storm force winds extending out 200 miles from the center. So what the cone is showing you is where that center is going to come up most likely. But you see the strong winds extending well outside of that cone. And we are definitely going to get into hurricane force wind gusts across South Florida. So the worst of the storm in southwest Florida, but it's certainly not going to be any picnic there in South Florida. And please, please listen to your local officials and keep in mind that a lot of the public safety officers are going to be recalled once the winds get to 40 miles per hour. This is going to cause widespread power outages, not just in the peninsula of Florida, but well inland as well, probably through most of the state of Georgia, much of South Carolina, and even a little farther north and west. We will see possible power outages into Tennessee, Kentucky, into Alabama, and up through parts of the Appalachians, again, because it is such a large windstorm. And this is a look at one of our model forecasts. Now, we may see some deviation from this in terms of timing or the exact track, but it's meant to give you an idea of how it's going to happen. And there you see that most dangerous eye wall coming into the Keys overnight tonight, early tomorrow morning. Significant water level rise along with that. Water's beginning to come up there in South Florida as well. Then into tomorrow afternoon, that eye wall devastating parts of southwest Florida into the afternoon. Winds really picking up across South Florida as well and getting farther up the coast into Sarasota, Bradenton. We're getting hit by the full full force of the storm later in the day in Sarasota and Bradenton, coming into Tampa very late tomorrow. We're talking about the eye wall now. And you see also on the underside of that circulation, there's the onshore flow that's really going to pile up the water in southwest Florida, 10 to 15 feet of water level rise there. And then here you see the core coming up through Orlando, and beyond that, those strong winds moving up into northern parts of Georgia. Huge area being affected by the storm, and our coverage of Hurricane Irma continues right now here on the Weather Channel.
A storm surge of 5 to 10 feet could wipe out our low-lying areas.
Well, very concerned.
The Weather Channel started talking about this storm far enough out. They heeded our warning.
And as Irma continues to lash the Cuba coast, it also moves closer to the U.S. Now lashing South Florida with the outer bands, winds already gusty in Key West, and water filling some streets in Miami with some of those outer rain bands and tropical force winds. I'm meteorologist Jen Carfagno, and I'm live in Savannah, Georgia, where we are under a hurricane watch from Hurricane Irma, which right now has winds of 125 miles per hour. It is a Category 3 and expected down with the influence of land of Cuba. But once it goes out over to the Florida Straits, we are expecting it to re-strengthen again, with winds expected to reach 140 miles before it makes landfall in the U.S. So let's take a look at the hurricane warnings and how far north they extend all the way up into Jacksonville. The watches have been expanded as well, with hurricane watches up through southern Georgia, southeastern Georgia too, including Savannah, and then over coastal areas of South Carolina. We've got tropical storm watches up, which does include the city of Charleston. The storm surge watches and warnings have been expanded as well, farther to the north. And so certainly that is going to be one of the dire concerns, especially now in southwest Florida, with that storm surge reaching over 10 to 15 feet. Very surge prone areas like Tampa Bay, looking at a 5 to 8 foot storm surge, and north of there 4 to 6 feet. The East Coast too will have some impact with 2 to 4 feet, and here in South Georgia actually a 4 to 6 foot surge. And one of the big impacts from from Irma here in Savannah will be worse than what we had in Matthew, which is at the time of high tide, we are expecting high water and expecting flooding. In fact, expecting it to be about 2 to 3 feet higher than what we had in Matthew here. So that's one of the reasons I'm here in the south, because these impacts are far reaching away from the point of landfall and actually will be a long duration as well. We're starting with the outer bands in South Florida today. We'll get the rain here in South Georgia by later tomorrow, and you can see in the Savannah area the brunt of the bad weather will be on Monday and into Monday evening. Rainfall amounts on the order to 5 to 8 inches here. There will be local areas that get more than 10 inches of rain. Rain will be a factor into heavy rain into the rivers here into southeast Georgia, with some areas projected to be in major flooding Monday into Monday evening. All right, let's talk about the rain in South Florida too, because we know the Florida Keys already getting the outer bands and getting the rainfall. Could see over 20 to 25 inches of rain. And as we go farther north into central Florida, up into South Georgia, and this forecast goes through Tuesday, by the way, it's a widespread area of 5 to 8 and 8 to 12 inches of rain. Let's bring in Dr. Erica Navarro to talk more about one of the big concerns that I have, and that's the storm surge. And Dr. Navarro, we know that you can hide from the wind, you can be in shelter, but you have to be evacuated from water.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Jen. There is just no easy way to say this, but the storm surge threat here is life-threatening across the western coast of Florida. This is an area that we know is particularly prone to storm surge, and we are anticipating here life-threatening values now with this storm as it's going to be making its way up the western coast of Florida in the coming days. Taking a look at the latest information from the Hurricane Center, we'll have another advisory coming out in the next hour. You can see here the winds have come down just a little bit, 125 miles per hour sustained. This is still a very strong and powerful hurricane with the potential to intensify again before it makes its approach to South Florida. So please do not let your guards down here. Category 3 storm moving to the west now at 9 miles per hour. So we're seeing this storm slow down just a bit. And that is what we are anticipating when that storm makes that northward turn. It will begin to stall, and it will be stalling over some very warm water. So again, that's going to enhance that potential for that storm to intensify and come up just a little bit more before it makes landfall here somewhere along the western Florida coast. Here's a look at the satellite imagery from today. You can see there's that core of that storm in those blue and green colors there just off to the north of the coast of Cuba. This interaction with land is the reason why this storm has weakened just a little bit, because that's been disrupting the circulation. But we are already seeing the impacts beginning across areas in South Florida as these strong outer bands are moving through now from the east onto the land. We're seeing some tornado spin-ups here, or at least some tornado warnings that have come out already. Some rainfall and lightning is likely to continue here throughout the day, so the impacts again are beginning and will only worsen through the weekend with this storm as it approaches the coast. Here's the track of that storm again hugging the northern coast of Cuba. It will be exiting this area very shortly and moving into again a region here in the Florida Straits that is extremely favorable for further development. The maximum water temperature here is 91 degrees. That's well above the threshold that we need to enhance the tropical systems here. And if you just look at the broad general area, the entire area is well into the upper 80s. So again, we still have that potential for some continued strengthening. Here's a look at the latest cone. You can see now things have absolutely shifted off to the west. So we're anticipating that center of circulation to move through the Florida Keys sometime tomorrow morning and then continue basically parallel here to the Florida coast. There may be some deviations to the left or right. Even a deviation of 30 miles here could make a huge difference for the impacts across the west. We see a landfall here somewhere along the western coast, anywhere from the Everglades up through Fort Myers and up to Tampa. Those are not out of the realm of possibilities. So please pay attention to the forecast. Again, as Jen and I were just talking about, these are the current storm surge numbers that we are talking. Look at this. The west coast of Florida from Fort Myers down through Naples, 10 to 15 feet of storm surge potential here above normally dry ground. That is a life-threatening inundation that we are expecting in this area. And this is not only just going to be along the coast. This water will rise very quickly because the shelf here, the ocean floor, is fairly shallow over the western coast of Florida. That water will move further inland. So it's not just coastal areas here that we are worried about. So please, you need to leave if you are in any of these areas. Now these numbers also to the north of Fort Myers have come up quite a bit, 6 to 10 feet now, moving up towards the Tampa Bay area. Tampa Bay, your numbers now are in the 5 to 8 foot range, which is very devastating for the Tampa Bay area. That is a high amount of storm surge to come in through that region. So again, these are life-threatening impacts here on the western coast of Florida. Down at the Keys, we're talking about 5 to 10 feet, and we still have a storm surge threat here on the eastern side of that state because we will see the onshore winds there in that area as well because of the track of this system with that center of circulation here making up its way up to the north into the state of Georgia. Here's where Jen is now on the Georgia coast. We are also talking about a storm surge there into Sunday night into Monday with the winds there coming on shore as that circulation moves up. So the threats here are not just contained to Florida. They will go into Georgia and South Carolina. And these are very strong winds from a potential Category 4 hurricane here that we are talking making landfall sometime in the next 24 hours. All right, here's a look at the model forecast in time. This is tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. The center of circulation likely going to be in the Florida Keys area, and you can see those strong winds moving into the Miami and South Florida area, and we will be seeing the impacts there picking up imminently. Again, the details here may change. That center of circulation will travel somewhat parallel to the western coast, and we'll see then on Sunday night and Monday those strong onshore winds on the south side of that circulation exacerbating that storm surge threat in the Fort Myers and Naples area. So Jen, this is a fairly concerning forecast moving forward in time because we are seeing very strong impacts here along the west and east coast of Florida and up into the Carolinas. So it's good to see that people are preparing. But again, this is a very strong storm that we're dealing with here.
It's a mass evacuation here, the largest, certainly in Florida history, if not, in our history. I look back to other hurricanes and you think about Rita and even Gustav had a big evacuation, none this size. And so the concern extends all the way up the coast now of west coast of Florida, all the way into Tampa, where today's a beautiful day. I've been watching Chris Bowen's shot and looking at the blue sky behind him and thinking this is a great day to shore up your evacuation plans and be ready now. And in terms of the evacuations, Chris, this is sort of a newer area that's getting evacuations compared to the rest of the state. So folks truly do need to rush to completion their evacuation and their preparations today. I know that you've just gotten into town, but do you think everyone is really taking this very seriously and getting the message, more importantly?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think people are taking this seriously. I mean, even just flying here, that was all the whole plane was talking about. Everyone's concerned, do I leave or do I go? Here's the thing, you want to get away from the water. We're talking about storm surge, and just to clarify, as Dr. Erica Navarro and our senior hurricane specialists, along with all our hurricane specialists, have emphasized, storm surge is the level above dry ground. That's not even including the water rise. Keep in mind, water rise will be even higher than that. And then we're talking 5 to 8 feet potentially here of storm surge, and could even be higher above dry ground. That's enough to cover the whole first floor and start to get into that second floor. So life-threatening storm surge, that is going to be a big issue. Even here in this spot where we are at, we're in a Zone A evacuation zone here in Hillsborough County, downtown Tampa, right behind me. Everything along the water here is under a mandatory evacuation. And there's not a lot of boats, so a lot of people are definitely heeding those warnings. Again, for a Saturday, it's very light traffic. There are people running and there's people taking in those last minute preps. But again, the weather's still good to finish up those last minute preps. Keep in mind, the worst of the weather will be late tomorrow night here into Monday morning. So you still have another 24 hours to finish up any of those plans. If you have friends that live out of a storm surge prone zone that you want to get to, especially if you live near water, that would be the advice, to evacuate the storm. But you want to get away from the water and where the water will rise. And again, the city has been debating on whether they want to add any more zones, potentially to a mandatory evacuation. That hasn't been done yet, but of course we'll let you know. And as far as the evacuations go, that really began this morning, especially with that westward track. Now keep in mind, there's about 3 million people here in the Tampa Bay area, and a lot of people have evacuated, but there's still a lot of people here, and some are still on that cusp, should I stay or should I go? Now, FPL, that's the Florida Power and Light, they've spent about $2.7 billion improving weather hardening the system since Katrina and Wilma. They were under a lot of scrutiny with especially a lot of the storms. So they are well prepared for the storm. And of course, a lot of people here will lose power. The winds are going to be a big issue. Especially with that westward track, we could see those winds over 100 miles per hour here in Tampa. And the last time Tampa had a major hurricane was 1921. So a lot of folks here, unlike South Florida, where a lot have been through hurricanes, there's a lot, in fact, the majority of the population here that hasn't been through a hurricane. So a lot of this is new. And so people may think, oh, I'm going to ride out the storm. But we all know people that ride out hurricanes say they will never ride it out again. So take it from people that have been in the hurricanes. And again, Jen, here in Tampa, it's almost a worst case scenario, especially with that westward track. Storm surge going to be life threatening, but along with the storm surge, it's going to be the winds. And I mean, there could be some major devastation here throughout the Tampa Bay metro area. Back to you in Savannah.
And the longer time it spends over water, we know it has the potential to strengthen even more. Chris, thank you for that. And with regard to evacuations, I want to say something that the Pinellas County Sheriff said in a press conference earlier. And he said, with regard to people underneath the mandatory evacuation, you can call, but we're not coming. And that's for people who don't leave if they're under a mandatory evacuation. It is going to be a life-threatening situation when it comes to the water and the wind right there along the coastline. So if you're under a mandatory, please go so that officials, emergency management responders don't need to come out and rescue you should the case warrant. All right, let's get the latest on what we know about Irma. We'll go back to the studio with Liana.
All right, thanks so much, Jen. And we want to show you this. This right here is the scene in Cuba as Irma made landfall as the Category 5 hurricane there overnight. Let's go ahead and get you caught up on what we know right now. 17.1 million people are under hurricane warnings on both coasts of Florida. Another 1.7 million are now being blamed after smashing across the entire states. Florida Power and Light has mobilized 13,500 workers from 30 states as far away as California to help restore power after Irma strikes. And outer bands of Irma are now reaching the Florida Keys in South Florida. So let's talk about what we're seeing, the cone that we're looking at. This is what Dr. Navarro showed us, the forecast path. By Sunday morning, 140-mile-per-hour winds are expected to push towards the Miami coastline, the Keys, and then it's going to push further north. Tampa, you are in line to see those 140-mile-per-hour winds by Sunday evening, and it kicks up into Monday morning, still at 115 miles per hour as it even moves on shore. And it will continue to trek further north, well inland, Atlanta, Nashville. You'll start seeing those really strong winds, not quite as strong as the 115-mile-per-hour winds, but it will start to weaken, but still it's going to be strong enough to do some damage. By the time it reaches Nashville, those winds drop off to 30 miles per hour. Those are gusts, but still the impacts will be felt. So expect some numerous power outages, some potential for flooding as well. Marathon, Florida, here's a look what you can expect now through Sunday night. 40+ mile-per-hour winds. The strongest gusts are expected late Saturday, later today, and through Sunday morning. 18 to 24 inches of rainfall expected, and that surge up to 10 feet. And Fort Myers, Florida, similar situation. You're going to start seeing the impact, the first signs of those winds picking up later tonight, and it continues into Monday morning. The strongest winds will pick up Sunday night, and we are still expecting almost a foot of rain and that surge up to 15 feet. A lot of rain associated with Hurricane Irma, of course. We're looking at feet of rain, not inches. This is 14 inches in this hot pink area, and once you get into that red area, including Fort Myers, Miami, you're looking at 9 to a foot of rain. Belle Glade, you're looking at 9 inches and a little bit less, but still lots of rain, and that's on top of the storm surge that's going to be pushing on shore. Tampa, Florida, here's a look at what you can expect Sunday morning through Monday morning is when you can expect those 40-mile-per-hour winds. The strongest gusts picking up late Sunday into Monday morning. Jen, sending it back out to you.
All right, and here in Savannah, we are under a mandatory evacuation, and that began this morning, continues through tomorrow. They did contraflow on I-16 to make sure folks. Now, of course, Irma is here, already lashing South Florida with those outer bands. We'll have an update on the impacts and the forecast after this.
Now, let me
Welcome back to the Weather Channel's live and continuous coverage of Hurricane Irma as it now bears down on the Keys and begins to Florida. I'm Justin Michaels, live for you this afternoon in Orlando, Florida. And they always say a ship is safer at sea than at port. Well, a very small example of that is happening right here, Lake Eola in Orlando, Florida. You can see their maintenance boat. It's moored out there in the middle of Lake Eola. Well, it's typically docked just beyond the fountain, but they put that boat out to sea, if you will, its own little sea in the lake, to keep it safer out there and also keep it away from anything that it could impact on land. And that's what's happening here a lot in Orlando and much of Florida. People securing things like the Florida Department of Transportation, securing all the barrels and cones and other things along the highway system. I-95, the Florida Turnpike, I-4. They've secured everything that could be a projectile, could blow up in the wind and turn into a projectile. So what can they expect here in Orlando? Well, throughout the afternoon tomorrow, we are expecting tropical storm force winds, 30, 40 mile an hour winds. But then tomorrow night, Sunday night into Monday, that's when it's really going to ramp up. We're talking gusts 90 to 100 miles an hour. And Liana, of course, we're going to be talking about hurricane force winds. A tough go for people here in Orlando, but nothing like what's happening on the West Coast. Liana.
Yeah, exactly, Justin. Thanks so much. I mean, we have the wind threat as well as the storm surge. And we do have storm surge watches and warnings currently in effect, stretching all across the Florida coastline. Here's a look at what we can expect. Storm surge warnings are in those hot pink colors, stretching from Tampa, Miami, West Palm Beach, Naples, and Key West. A little bit further north, storm surge watches are in effect up towards St. Mark's, Florida, as well as Jacksonville, Charleston, and Savannah. Now, Dr. Eric Navarro has a great example of what you can expect with that storm surge.
Yeah, thanks so much, Liana. With the new track of Irma moving into the western side of Florida, this exacerbates the storm surge threat here because the Gulf Coast is particularly vulnerable to this storm surge threat, with the ocean floor being a little bit more shallow off the coast. We can go ahead and take a closer look at some of the areas that are being impacted, starting up here to the north. Here's the wide view of that system, but notice the orange and red colors. The orange shows you a 6 to 9 foot reasonable worst case scenario in some of these areas. Up into the Cedar Key, you can see a lot of reds there as well. That is a 9-foot storm surge there that we are potentially talking about, again, being the reasonable worst case scenario with the current information of this system. If we continue to go down into the Tampa Bay area, the numbers there have also come up, and these numbers, again, are staggering in some of these areas. Down in Fort Myers, notice the number of red colors here near the coast. This water will be life-threatening inundation in a lot of these areas. It will also move further up just from the coast onto the land, so this will be further inland. But if you look at a place like Naples, the entire city here has the potential to be underwater, with a 9-foot potential here, not only on the coast, but well into the city across Highway 41. And the same is true for Marco Island. We could potentially be seeing an entire island here underwater with these latest numbers. So again, this threat is life-threatening. This is what it looks like right here on the map. But if we break this out and look at it in 3D, notice how the water here starts flowing into the lowest level of your home, and that's only up to 3 feet. If we kick things up to 6 feet, now we have your entire car submerged underwater. This water is above the level of my head, so I would not be able to stand in it. And we now have things floating in the water like debris, which you are not able to see. This could also include chemicals and exposed power lines in that area. And if we get to the reasonable worst case scenario here of 9 feet, your entire first and second level of your home is underwater. So this is not something that you can withstand. There are many threats here with this system, but the storm surge is not one that we want you to be dealing with here. So please heed the warnings of your officials and evacuate if necessary. We're going to have more coverage here coming from Florida as well as in the studio for Hurricane Irma. Stay with us. The impacts here are imminent in the state of Florida.
This is a lot of rain, a lot of wind, but what's troubled me all week was the storm surge.
This hurricane coming, I am not going to stay here.
Winds are only going to get stronger from here on out.
If a hurricane comes here and takes this town out, it's going to be a financial disaster.
And our continuing live coverage of Hurricane Irma right here on the Weather Channel. I'm meteorologist Jen Carfagno. I am live in Savannah, Georgia, where we are under a hurricane watch, a storm surge watch, and a mandatory evacuation in Georgia for areas east of I-95. That is ongoing right now as they have contraflow on I-16 to get folks out of the area. And of course, we're continuing our coverage as Irma approaches and now lashes South Florida with these outer rain bands. Been watching the rain come down with thunderstorms in South Florida, including around Key West, where winds there have gusted over 50 miles per hour. Within these bands, some of these cells have already produced tornado warnings, and we saw that just about an hour ago around Everglades City, and we'll watch for that threat ongoing starting today and continuing actually through the lifetime of this storm. The tornado threat will be there as well. Now let's talk about the system and the core of it, which is off the coast of Cuba, and we're now able to get radar images. The Key West radar and the long range reach out that far, so we can see now on radar that the core of the system is still intact despite the land interaction that it had with Cuba. So it is expected to intensify. Right now it's a Category 3. We are expecting a Category 4 as it approaches the South Florida coast. And again, you can see on that radar, look at the core of it. It, despite the land interaction, was not compromised, and just saw in the latest position update from the National Hurricane Center that the winds at a weather station in Cuba were gusting to 159 miles per hour earlier today. We will get hourly updates on the position of Irma from the National Hurricane Center now that it has gotten within radar range here of the U.S. And so right now it is located about 160 miles to the southeast of Key West, Florida. All right, hurricane warnings are posted for pretty much the entire peninsula. Hurricane watches to the north of that. In fact, that goes all the way into South Georgia. We've got the watches issued there and tropical storm watches just up to the north of that as well. Charleston under a tropical storm watch. I was there yesterday. Today I'm in Savannah, hurricane watch and storm surge watch here as well. And we know the storm surge, especially down on the southwest coast and the west coast of the Florida Peninsula, is a very significant and dire concern as we watch this latest track take it right up along that west side of Florida. All right, continuing our coverage here from Savannah, we want to talk more about what's happening in Florida and talk more about what we've already seen as well. So let's take you out to some of the video that we have seen already coming in from the area. All right, so this is Fort Lauderdale. Thank you. This is Fort Lauderdale, where they've been getting some of the outer bands, and it's been gusty. Winds have been, gusting over 20 or 30 miles per hour, and rounds of rain have come in. So for anyone who was rushing their preparations to completion today, this is the kind of weather we're starting to deal with here. Some gusty winds, some showers, and it will quickly go downhill later this afternoon. Let's go down into Miami, and I will show you what we are dealing with here as well. Have seen some of those outer reaches come on in, outer bands. You can see how dark the sky looks out here as well as we watch the outer edges. Tropical storm force winds at least expected with some of these as they move on in. And in Miami, they're under a curfew starting at 8 o'clock this evening. Saw some extreme winds actually just off the coast of Miami at an elevated platform there. And I think, speaking to Dr. Navarro, how far-reaching the at least tropical storm force, if not hurricane force winds will be. It's 180 miles away still from Miami, and yet just offshore at that platform, the winds were gusting in excess of 100 miles per hour. So we know, regardless of the point of landfall, there will be widespread impacts. But of course, near that point of landfall, it could be catastrophic.
Absolutely, Jen. Those wind fields near the center will be catastrophic, depending on where that center does in fact come on shore. But with a storm this big, we have a tropical storm force wind field that's nearly 200 miles from the center. And as Jen just mentioned, we're already seeing those impacts into the Miami area, even though the storm is well offshore here and still is moving along the coast, the northern coast of Cuba. Taking a look right now at the wind gusts, you can see in the Miami area, we're gusting 44, but we have seen some higher amounts than that today. We'll talk about that in just a second, but we are seeing those winds pick up here. here as this storm is just battering the northern coast of Cuba right now. Taking a look, and not likely to exit until later on this afternoon. It is beginning to make its trek, though, towards the Florida Straits. Here's a look at the radar. You can see some of those outer bands here coming on shore with a bit of stronger thunderstorm activity. We're keeping a close eye on this for any spin-ups, any quick spin-ups here of tornadoes, because that is a threat that we often deal with